This is section 4, Goal of Life, chapter 6, Supreme Peace, Nibbāna. 6.1, Introduction. Human beings encounter many trials and tribulations. The situation can be summed up in one word: suffering, dukkha. Most people freely acknowledge that life, both on a personal and social level, involves facing problems. These problems affect their happiness and present moral dilemmas. A close inspection reveals that all of these problems stem from the same source. That is, by its very nature, human life is endowed with problems, or it has the potential to cause problems. Saying that the purpose of life is to pursue happiness implies suffering. The very search for happiness reveals an inner deficiency that drives people to seek fulfillment. This suffering has many consequences. The search for happiness gives rise to conflicts of interest and to social problems. What begins as a personal problem is magnified and spreads outward. Yet this description is rather ambiguous. For the sake of clarity, one needs to get to the heart of the matter. A basic truth of life is that it is characterized by dukkha. The very nature of human life is marked by this universal characteristic of dukkha. Human life is a conditioned phenomena, sankhara, subject to various causes and conditions. It is impermanent, unstable, fleeting, and devoid of any lasting self or substance. One is unable to sustain life or to shape it purely according to one's desires. One must conform to causes and conditions. This is dukkha on a more fundamental level. And this is note 6.1, translations of dukkha. Translation: there are many English translations for dukkha, including suffering, unsatisfactoriness, stress, pain, and misery. The Buddha uses this word in different contexts, most notably in A, the three characteristics, referring to the stress and pressure inherent in conditioned phenomena, see chapter 3. B, the Four Noble Truths, referring to human suffering caused by ignorance and craving, see chapter 19. And C, the three kinds of feeling, Vedana, referring to painful sensation, see chapter 1. The author here is highlighting the overlap and connection between these meanings, especially A and B. Back to the text. The dukkha fundamental to life can be summed up by the words aging, jara, and death, marana, or by the words decay and dissolution. In the wake of this fundamental dukkha follows dukkha as a human feeling or emotion, for example, suffering, distress, grief, regret. Due to the fact that life is characterized by a basic form of dukkha, for people to truly solve problems, bring suffering to an end, and experience real happiness, they must firmly abide in the truth. To begin with, they must come to terms with the fundamental characteristic of dukkha. By applying wisdom in order to be free from it, or to live with it at ease, and to not create problems around it. If one is unable to reach this state, one should at least gain insight into this fundamental dukkha and develop a proper mental attitude in regards to it. One thus acknowledges and faces the truth with understanding. If people lack this stability and are unable to come to terms with the fundamental characteristic of dukkha, they allow it to become a hidden problem lying within. They then try to bury their problems and to turn a blind eye to suffering. They end up deceiving themselves, and the problems festering in the mind intensify and increase. People claim that they desire happiness and are averse to suffering, but they often create problems for themselves precisely through the means they use to achieve happiness. Instead of dispelling suffering and generating happiness, they evade suffering in order to pursue happiness. They do not attend to the underlying roots of suffering. Their problems then develop into more serious mental complexes. Instead of dispelling or reducing suffering, they increase and compound it, both within themselves and outwards in their conflicts with society. For those people who attempt to cover over and conceal their suffering, their pursuit of happiness indicates a sense of lack, distress, anxiety, and an unhappiness. They seek things in order to feel fulfilled or to dispel their agitation, yet in this search they come into conflict with others. Moral issues in society thus become intensified. By attending to suffering incorrectly, people vent their frustrations outward, increasing suffering for both themselves and others. As a consequence, the inherent stress, which is part and parcel of the conditioned nature of life, is neglected rather than addressed. With their singular ingenuity, people concoct a whole host of problems until the basic predicament of life of inherent stress is virtually forgotten. People may even delude themselves by thinking that happiness results from turning a blind eye to suffering. Footnote here is ignorance is bliss. To make matters worse, that inherent stress, which has been avoided, covertly incites people to search for and indulge in ever more passionate and restless forms of pleasure, depriving them of confidence and contentment. As a result, moral crises in societies become more serious, for instance, through the increase of competition and oppression, and suffering is exacerbated. As long as people are unable to come to terms with this fundamental aspect of life, unable to reconcile themselves to the universal characteristic of dukkha, they will not succeed in resolving their problems. They will not escape the oppression of dukkha, no matter how much pleasure they experience, and they will not meet with true, constant happiness, which is intrinsically complete and fully satisfying. Human life involves solving problems and seeking release from suffering, but if we do not know the correct way leading to freedom, our attempted solutions to these problems only bring about increased suffering. The greater the effort, the greater the affliction, becoming an ever more complex cycle, a whirlpool of suffering. This state of affairs is samsara vata, the wandering around, or round of rebirth, which the Buddha explained in the teaching of dependent origination, under the cycle of origination and the forward sequence. There is revealed how human suffering arises according to cause and effect. If people are able to face the truth and to understand the true nature of dukkha, besides being free of mental disorders that create and compound problems, they will be able to develop wisdom and to free their minds even from the fundamental dukkha inherent to life. The stress and pressure inherent in nature is recognized simply for what it is. It then has no power to create suffering in the minds of these individuals. Even before they have reached complete liberation, those people who are not deceived or obstructed by unhealthy mental complexes created from unresolved suffering are able to experience happiness in a full and satisfactory way. At the same time, they have the opportunity to develop happiness by accessing ever more refined, independent, spacious, replete, and pure forms of happiness until they eventually realize the happiness that is completely free from suffering. Their pathway to happiness is unrestricted and limitless. When the Buddha taught dependent origination, he did not end with the origin of suffering. He also taught the cycle of cessation, which is the process of turning back or turning away, the end of suffering. Human suffering can be remedied, and there are ways to achieve this. The Buddha went on to reveal the supreme state in which humans are able to live noble lives, enjoy genuine happiness, and bring true benefit and meaning to life. They become free without having to rely on external things or to depend on the happiness determined by conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena cannot sustain themselves, let alone sustain our happiness. Happiness dependent on external things offers no true support, since it is continually reliant on these things. Seeking meaning in this insecure form of happiness results in losing freedom and independence. Although one may not fully attain the state of turning away at first, to the extent that one correctly attends to problems, reducing the force of the origination cycle and increasing the force of the cessation cycle, suffering will gradually abate and one's life will be enhanced. One will be able to experience the pleasures of the world with wisdom, not enslaved to them or harmed by their fluctuating currents. Worldly pleasures will not be a source of trouble to oneself or others, and this healthy relationship to pleasure will promote well-being within society. The discussion here focuses on the cessation cycle and the end of suffering, which directly opposes the origination cycle with its resultant suffering. 6.2 Cessation of Suffering. A. Long format. Before we can solve problems, however large or trivial these problems may be, we must first understand them accurately. If not, they may become more complex and severe. To effectively resolve life's dilemmas, we must understand each dilemma as well as the conditions giving rise to it. This is especially true when dealing with life's fundamental problems. We must know suffering and the causes that bring about suffering. We must have an understanding of the truth, which is the essential factor for bringing an end to all suffering. A misunderstanding of the truth, on the other hand, creates problems. It results in people's attempted solutions having an effect counter to the desired effect and further intensifying suffering. The origination cycle, i.e. the creation of suffering, begins with ignorance. Ignorance, and I'll just, with the arrow, I'll say into, actually with the forward marking arrow, I'll just pause, and that will indicate a forward marking arrow. Ignorance, volitional activities, consciousness, mentality and corporality, 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair equals origin of suffering. The reverse form of this is the cessation cycle, which begins with the extinguishing or absence of ignorance. Ignorance ceases, volitional activities cease, consciousness ceases, mentality and corporality cease, 6 sense bases cease, contact ceases, feeling ceases, craving ceases, clinging ceases, becoming ceases, birth ceases, aging, death, plus sorrow, despair cease, equal cessation of suffering, dukkha nirodha. See note 6.2. So 6.2 is the cycles of paticca samuppada. Traditionally, there are 4 formats for outlining paticca samuppada, both the samudayavara and the nirodhavara cycles. Number 1, from beginning to end, the usual format, and that's just what I went through to begin with. And then number 2, from the end to the beginning, then that's what I went through too. And then number 3, from the middle to the beginning, for ahara, tanha, vedana, phasa, salatna, namarupa, vijnana, sankara, avijja, with the arrows pointing to the left between each of those, and 4 from the middle to the end, salatna, and then phasa, and these are in parentheses together, then rightward facing arrows, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati, jarmarana, plus soka, upayasa. In the context of nirodhavara, the long format beginning with cessation of ignorance is most commonly used. When explaining nirodhavara in the first 3 formats, the complete sequence is shown from or up to avijja, but in the 4th format, a shorter sequence is presented, as will be discussed soon. Okay, back to the text. The word nirodha, cessation, does not merely mean that something comes to an end, but also that it cannot reappear or function in the future. It is prevented from arising. It is stilled or detoxified. The term Paticam Samuppada Nirodha Vara means the ending of existent suffering and the prevention of further suffering, a process in which suffering does not arise. The expression ignorance ceases means both the end of existing ignorance and the non-arising of future ignorance. It refers to knowledge, vijja, and to freedom from ignorance. B, short format. Both the origination cycle and the cessation cycle shown above are expressed in the long format with all 12 constituent factors. Each cycle proceeds in consecutive order until all factors are complete. However, these cycles are not always shown in this way with the entire sequence of 12 factors. In the Pali Canon, there are passages where, for practical applications, the Buddha presented a process observable in daily life. The structure of these shortened formats depends on the point at which a problem begins or on the aspect he wished to emphasize. The short format of the origination cycle begins with cognition at the 6 sense bases, ayatana, and then proceeds as an unbroken chain to aging, death, sorrow, and despair. The initial part of the process, from ignorance up to the 6 sense bases, is omitted as its inherent influence is understood. The short format of the cessation cycle begins at the cessation of craving after initial contact and feeling. Here are 2 examples from the Pali Canon of the origination cycle, short format. Monks, a child grows up and his faculties mature still further. The youth enjoys himself, provided and endowed with the 5 strands of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and tangibles that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and endearing, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On seeing a form with the eye, hearing a sound with the ear, smelling an odor with the nose, tasting a flavor with the tongue, touching a tangible with the body, cognizing a mind object with the mind, he is fond of it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is displeasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body unestablished, with an inferior, undeveloped mind, and he does not understand as it actually is deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, wherein evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Engaged as he is in favoring and opposing whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he is gratified by that feeling. He broods over it and welcomes it and submits to it. As he does so, delight, nadi, infatuation, arises in him. Now delight in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, becoming arises. With becoming as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. M.I. 266-7. Bhikkhus, what is the origin of suffering? Dependent on the I and form, I consciousness arises. The union of these 3 is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. This is the origin of suffering. The same for the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. SII 72-3, SIV 78. Selecting the principal elements in the above text, the origination cycle can be shown as follows. Number 1, 6 sense bases onto contact. And these are in parentheses. Then on to feeling, delight, nadi, clinging, becoming, birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair equals the arising of suffering. Number 2, 6 sense bases onto, and that's in parentheses, contact, feeling, craving, tanha equals the arising of suffering. These 2 examples are essentially the same. They both begin with cognition at the sense bases. The first example presents the process up to the end. The second example presents the process only up to craving. The remainder is to be inferred. Now, 2 examples of the cessation cycle, short format. Number 1, the aforementioned child has studied and practiced the Dhamma. consisting of moral conduct and sense restraint, and developed concentrative absorption jhana. On seeing a form with the eye, cognizing a mind object with the mind, he is not fond of it if it is pleasing. He is not annoyed with it if it is displeasing. He abides with mindfulness of the body established, with a developed immeasurable mind, and he understands as it actually is deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Having thus abandoned favoring and opposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful or neither painful nor pleasant, he is not gratified by that feeling. He does not welcome it or submit to it. He does not do so. Delight, infatuation, and feelings, as he does not do so, delight, infatuation, and feelings ceases in him. With the cessation of his delight comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of becoming. With the cessation of becoming, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Number 2, bhikkhus, what is the passing away of suffering? Dependent on the eye and form, eye consciousness arises. The union of these three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Because that craving ceases and is extinguished without remainder, clinging ceases. With the cessation of clinging, becoming ceases. With the cessation of becoming, birth ceases. With the cessation of birth, old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. In this way, the entire mass of suffering ceases. This is the passing away of suffering. Same for the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. SII 72-3, SIV 87. Based on these two texts, the cessation cycle can be depicted as follows. Number 1, 6 sense bases to contact, and these are in parentheses, and feeling, delight, nadi, ceases, clinging ceases, becoming ceases, birth ceases, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and affliction cease, equals a cessation of suffering. Number 2, 6 sense bases is in parentheses, and contact, feeling, craving, tanha, semicolon, but craving ceases, clinging ceases, becoming ceases, birth ceases, aging and death, sorrow, affliction cease, equals the cessation of suffering. The first example presents all components of the short format, but in reverse form to the origination cycle. The second example begins the same way as example 2 of the origination cycle above, but where the origination cycle ends at craving, here the process changes course and completes the cycle of cessation. These two examples are essentially the same. They both demonstrate a severance of the cycle following initial cognition and feeling. As a result, delight or craving is prevented from arising and suffering ceases. Note that the meaning of nadi in the first passage is similar to that of tanha in the second. The meaning differs only slightly, suited to the context of the first passage. Note also that the expression delight ceases in example 1 indicates clearly that delight does not arise. There is no delight, infatuation. One can apply this to passage 2. Unlike the origination cycle where craving arises subsequent to initial cognition and feeling, craving is now uprooted. The cycle is broken and the subsequent factors do not arise. The cessation of suffering is accomplished. Although the short formats of samsara vata and vivata do not mention ignorance, the notion of ignorance is integral to both the origination and cessation cycles. When a feeling is experienced in the origination cycle, craving arises as a result of not fully comprehending the truth about the object encountered, that it is impermanent anicca, subject to stress, dukkha, and not self, anatta, and that it cannot be truly held on to as one's own. Also, a person does not know how the object is beneficial or harmful. He cognizes with ignorance, avijja samphasa. The feeling ensuing from such contacts gives rise to craving. In contrast, when a feeling is experienced in the cycle of cessation, craving does not arise, because the conditioned nature of the object is fully understood. With knowledge, vijja, as a basis, cognition occurs in a way not influenced by ignorance. Contact and feeling then do not lead to craving. The expression craving ceases implies the cessation of ignorance. Here, the short format indirectly points to the cessation of ignorance by highlighting the cessation of craving. This is analogous to the Buddhist concise definition of the second and third noble truth. Craving is the cause of suffering, and the end of suffering occurs with the end of craving. The Buddha used this way of speaking for practical reasons to illustrate the path and its immediate benefits. The key feature of cessation in both the long and short formats is the breaking of the sequence. Generally, the sequence is broken at one of two junctures. The primary break is at ignorance, and the secondary break is at craving. Breaking the cycle is of two types, directly at ignorance and indirectly at craving. In either case, the break that is made must include the elimination of ignorance. Once the cycle is broken, the round of rebirth, samsara vata, ends. The process of turning away, vivata, is reached, and freedom from suffering is obtained. A person thus vanquishes all of life's troubles and is without sorrow and affliction. He or she has true happiness, arriving at knowledge, vijja, liberation, vimutti, purity, visuddhi, peace, santi, and nibbāna. This is the highest benefit that human beings can obtain, making life worthwhile. 6.3. The state of Nibbāna. Etymologically, Nibbāna derives from the prefix ni, out, without, finished, or ended, and vana, to blow, to go, to move, or in another sense, restraint. It can be used in relation to fire or burning, meaning extinguishing, quenching, cooling, or coolness, but not extinction. In reference to the mind, it means peaceful, refreshed, and happy, an absence of agitation and anxiety. Similarly, it refers to the end of defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. These commentaries and sub-commentaries usually define Nibbāna as the end of or escape from craving, which binds people to repeated existence. And then it says, see note 6.3. And note 6.3 says, definitions of Nibbāna. Analyses of the word Nibbāna occur at many scriptural passages, especially in D2:33, Vinaya A, and then a whole list of references and Pali words that I'm not going to try to attempt. Most of these explanations are identical or similar. And then further definitions include free from the jungle, i.e. the tangle of impurities, but with a bunch of references, and an end to the triad of dukkha, dukkha, viparinama dukkha, and sankhara dukkha, VSMT. And then free of piercing arrows, included in the Dhamma Vikarana of Somdet, Phra, Mahasamana, Chakram, Phra, Praya, Vajranana, Varasa. Excuse me for that. Okay, back to the main text. When the round of rebirth, samsara vata, ends, freedom from rebirth, vivata, takes over immediately and automatically. One does not travel from a place of samsara vata to a place of vivata unless one is speaking figuratively or comparatively. Ignorance, craving, and clinging cease, and Nibbāna appears simultaneously in their place. One can say that the cessation of ignorance, craving, and clinging is Nibbāna. Ignorance, craving, and clinging disturb the minds of unenlightened people and conceal wisdom. They entangle the mind with defilements, kilesa, and distort vision. When ignorance, craving, and clinging cease, luminous wisdom, vijja, arises. With such wisdom, one sees all things accurately, not through the lens of one's desires. A person's perception Attitudes and personality change. A new knowledge and vision arises. Things appear that one has never known, seen, or conceived of, because they were concealed in the shadows, or because one was preoccupied with other objects. The mind unfolds and expands immeasurably. It is clear, free, resplendent, peaceful, and profound. When the state of Nibbāna is reached, one knows this for oneself. Nibbāna is to be seen for oneself, timeless, inviting one to come and see, to be brought within and realized, to be experienced individually by the wise. AI 158-9. Ordinary people are unable to comprehend or imagine the state of Nibbāna. When encouraging new concepts, people normally use previous knowledge as a base for comparison. And in attempting to understand Nibbāna, they create an image that is a composite of pre-existing preconceptions. Take, for example, a person who has never heard of an elephant. On hearing the word elephant, he may think it is a foreign word or simply nonsense. Learning that an elephant is an animal, he may consider all animals from ants to whales, irrespective of size or type. The image is clear when he is told that an elephant is an enormous land animal with big ears, small eyes, tusks, and a trunk. This image may be close to reality or far from it. If he were to draw a picture on paper of what he sees in his mind, it may resemble some bizarre mythological beast. Having never seen the real thing, he uses familiar perceptions to create an elaborate new image. The image will depend both on the accuracy of the speaker's description of the object and on the listener's stored perceptions used as components for a new perception. In the case of something utterly different from anything previously perceived and thoroughly incomparable, the listener may have no way to conceive of it. If he attempts to understand this thing by means of familiar concepts and perceptions, the only reasonable way for the speaker to respond is by negation. Further speculation by the listener using stored perceptions for comparison can easily lead to misunderstanding. He may even go so far as outright rejection, accusing the speaker of deception and claiming that the thing in question does not exist. Such rejection based on unfamiliarity and an inability to conceive of something would be ungrounded. Nibbāna is beyond everything known by ordinary people, beyond their sphere and range, surpassing cognition influenced by ignorance, craving, and clinging. It is a state arrived at directly with the abandonment of defilements, like sliding back a screen and seeing the sky. Nibbāna has no properties similar to things known by ordinary people, but claiming Nibbāna does not exist is incorrect. The following fable has been used to illustrate how the unknown is not necessarily the unreal. A fish and a turtle were close friends. The fish had spent its entire life in a lake, whereas the amphibious turtle knew both land and lake. One day the turtle returned to the lake after a walk on the land. He told the fish how refreshing it was to walk on land, among open fields and a pleasant breeze. The fish listened for a while, perplexed, and thought, "What is walking? What is dry land? How can there be happiness without water? Certainly it just spells death." The fish grew impatient and interrupted the turtle, seeking clarification. The turtle explained using earth terms when the fish inquired with water terms. The turtle could only reject them. The turtle could not find any suitable comparisons, and the fish thus concluded that the turtle was lying, that the story wasn't true. Dry land does not exist, and nor do fields, pleasant breezes, or happiness outside of water. The turtle spoke of something that does exist, but it lay beyond the fish's ken. Since the fish had never been on land, it was unable to understand. Consider the distinct experience and perception arising from each of the senses. Sense impressions differ absolutely from each other and are not comparable. Sights cannot be compared with sounds, nor can sounds with smells. A person blind from birth cannot understand the nature of green, red, orange, pink, and other characteristics of sight using perceptual knowledge from other sense bases. Words such as loud, faint, malodorous, fragrant, sour, sweet would all be inadequate. No one can accurately explain to a person born without the sense of smell the quality of fetid, fragrant, the smell of roses, citrus, or jasmine. Words such as red, blue, heavy, light, fat, thin, bitter, and salty would all be unsuitable. Human beings have 5 sense organs for cognizing the world's properties. The sense objects, aramana, knowledge surpassing the domain of mundane objects, generally remains hidden. Even the 5 recognized sense objects are known according to disparate qualities. Lack of familiarity or an inability to conceive of something is therefore not a guarantee of its non-existence. Soon after the Buddha's enlightenment, before proclaiming the Dhamma, he had this thought: the Dhamma that I have attained is profound, difficult to see, difficult to realize, peaceful, excellent, not accessible by reasoning, subtle to be known by the wise. This is followed by the verse, I should not now teach what I have attained with such tribulation. This Dhamma cannot be easily realized by those overcome with greed and hatred. Beings died in lust, enveloped in darkness, ignorance, will not discern that which goes against the current, is subtle, profound, difficult to see, refined. Vin I 5, MI 168. Despite its complexity, the Buddha did make great effort to teach and explain the Dhamma. However, Nibbāna cannot be penetrated by mere thought. No words or perceptions exist to accurately describe or define it. Conceptualizing and disputing the subject of Nibbāna only leads to misunderstanding. The correct way is to apply the teaching so as to arrive at Nibbāna and see it clearly for oneself. With proper determination, rather than being inconceivable or indescribable, Nibbāna is merely difficult to see, difficult to realize, as quoted by the Buddha above. It is worth noting the expressions the Buddha used when he spoke about Nibbāna. The definitions of Nibbāna can be summarized in the following 4 ways. 1. By negation. Those expressions marking the renunciation and removal of some inferior, unlovely, or disadvantaged condition belonging to the round of rebirth. For example, Nibbāna is the end of greed, hatred, and delusion. Nibbāna is cessation of becoming. Nibbāna is the end of craving and the end of suffering. Such descriptions also use terms revealing a quality directly opposite to an attribute of vata. For example, Nibbāna is unconditioned, ageless, and deathless. By synonym, those terms indicating completion or perfection. For example, Santa, peaceful, Panita, excellent, Sudhi, pure, and Kema, secure. 3. By simile and metaphor. Similes are more often used for explaining the state and traits of a person who has attained Nibbāna than for Nibbāna itself. For example, the comparison of an arhat to a bull leading his herd across the river to arrive at the other side, or to a person crossing a great ocean filled with dangers in reaching the shore. The Buddha claimed that it is inaccurate to say an arhat is reborn, reappears somewhere, or is not born. He compared an arhat to a fire that is extinguished because there is no more fuel. There are some direct similes. For example, Nibbāna is like a tranquil, pleasant region, like the other shore, secure and free from danger, and like a message of truth. There are many metaphors. For example, arogya, without illness, perfect health. Dipa, an island, freedom from danger, and Lina, a cave, shelter from danger. In later scriptures composed by disciples, there are metaphors referring to Nibbāna as a city, e.g., magnificent city, and Nibbāna Nagara, fortress of Nibbāna, used as oratorical and literary terms. Thai idioms include Great Deathless Citadel and Crystal City, but these later words are not recognized as accurate terms revealing the true state of Nibbāna. And number 4, by direct explanation. These explanations occur in only a few places, but they are of much interest to scholars, especially for those who consider Buddhism a philosophy. The varying interpretations have given rise to numerous debates. I have presented a selection below. Epithets for Nibbāna are occasionally found grouped in a single passage. Examples of all 4 kinds of definitions are listed below in Pali alphabetical order. And for the sake of time and sparing you my pronunciation, I'm going to probably skip most of the Pali and just give the definitions or translations with a slight pause between them. So for this first one, akanha asukha, not black, not white, not confined to social class or caste, neither good nor bad, neither puna nor papa. Akata, not made, not built. Nothing lingering in the mind, free from anxiety. Fearless, immovable, undeparting. Marvelous, ageless, undecaying. Not born, not swayed in absence of craving. Limitless, no grasping. Sublime, foremost, without longing and absence of clinging, without asava, effluence taints, not seen with the eye, signless, without calamity, unsurpassed, supreme, not disintegrating, not dissolving, free of danger, has not been before, wonderful, without disease, without oppression, free from dukkha, not coming to be, deathless, not declining, immutable, undefiled, unshakable, not constructed, unshifting, sorrowless, without sickness, perfect health, freedom, mastership, security, safety, the end of craving, defender, protection, island, refuge, the end of suffering, difficult to see, enduring, subtle, without obstructive defilements, without papancha, the cessation of defilements in all suffering, cooling, the allayment of affliction, nirodha, cessation of suffering, excellent, paramattha, the supreme benefit, the supreme truth, the other shore, safe destination, muti, release, emancipation, moksha, salvation, freedom from bondage, sanctuary, shelter from danger, vimutti, liberation, freedom, vimoksha, liberation, stainless, viraga, the fading, cooling off, and expiration of lust, purity, impeccable, visuddhi, sakha, truth, santi, peaceful, still, santi, peace, sarana, refuge, highest bliss, purity, exceedingly difficult to see. There are many more references and descriptions for Nibbāna in the scriptures containing verses by disciples and in the commentaries, as well as in later scriptures. Examples are listed below. Imperishable, interminable, unfaltering, unwavering, free from constraints, independent of sense objects, not born, without formations, final emancipation, deathless, without rupa, formless, without enemies, unconfined, unoppressed, unadulterated, inherently complete, constant, certain, free from distress, tranquility, calm, place to be reached, destination, the beyond, the ultimate, conclusion, goal, the abandonment of defilements, deliverance from the round of rebirth without vata, and stillness. Some of these terms are very important since they are repeatedly used as definitions for Nibbāna. For example, Sanghata, Nirodha, Vimutti, Viraga, Santa, and Santi. Other words are used infrequently. Some are used in only one location, others in 2 or 3 locations, so they should not be regarded as highly sufficient. They are included here to increase understanding. The same is true for the translations. They provide some sense of meaning, but they might not give a complete flavor as they lack the support of context. And very important, many terms were familiar to people in the specific time period, region, and community in which the Buddha taught, and the terms were associated with their personal values or religious beliefs. When the words were spoken, the listeners probably understood the meaning completely. Sometimes the Buddha used descriptive words for Nibbāna to facilitate communication while substituting a new meaning in accord with Buddhadhamma. People outside of those time periods, places, and groups may not completely understand the meaning of these words. An important word for describing Nibbāna is sanghata, not constructed. Nibbāna does not exist as a result of causes and conditions. It may be claimed that Nibbāna must arise from causes, since Nibbāna is the fruit of Magga, the path, the way, or of practice in accordance with the way. This doubt can be answered briefly by the way of an analogy. If we compare practice for reaching Nibbāna with traveling to the city of Chiang Mai, we see that Chiang Mai, which is the goal of the journey, is not the result of the path or the act of traveling. Regardless of the road of traveling, Chiang Mai exists. The road and traveling are causes for reaching Chiang Mai, but not for Chiang Mai itself. It is the same with the path and practice along the path, which are causes for attaining Nibbāna, but not for Nibbāna itself. Apart from Vimutti, there are many other synonyms that reveal facets of Nibbāna as presented earlier. Of all these synonyms, there are 2 often used words that represent important properties, Visuddhi and Santi. Visuddhi is purity or cleanness, the absence of defilements, which tarnish and obscure, and refers to the ability to see things clearly. Santi is peace, the absence of agitation and affliction, the end of turmoil. This state of mind is serene, deep, cool, settled, self-reliant, able to fully experience the fruits of practice, and ready to be employed for action. The few passages that explain the state of Nibbāna explicitly are presented below. In some cases, a story is provided in order to give the context for the Buddha's words. At one time, the Buddha gave a Dhamma discourse to the bhikkhus concerning Nibbāna. As the bhikkhus were listening intently, the Buddha uttered this exclamation, "Monks, there exists that sphere, ayatana, where there is neither the earth, water, fire, or air elements, nor the realm of infinite space, nor the realm of infinite consciousness, nor the realm of nothingness, nor the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, nor this world, nor the next, nor the moon, nor the sun. I do not say that this sphere has going, coming, arising, staying, or passing away. It has neither foundation nor movement, nor constraint. That is the end of suffering." UD 880-81. On another occasion, the Buddha gave a similar teaching to bhikkhus and uttered this verse. Indeed, anatta, the state of not inclining towards birth, being without craving, i.e. Nibbāna, is difficult to see. Truth, Sakka is not easily discerned. Having penetrated craving and by knowing and seeing the truth, there will be nothing lingering in the mind, nothing to cause mental anxiety. On a similar occasion, monks, there is the not born, not become, not made, not constructed. If there were not the not born, not become, not made, not constructed, then there could not be known the escape here from the born, the become, the made, and the constructed. But because there is the not born, not become, not made, not constructed, therefore the escape here can be known from the born, become, made, and constructed. On a similar occasion, still being dependent, there is wavering. Not being dependent, there is no wavering. There being no wavering, there is tranquility. With tranquility, there is no favoring. With no favoring, no coming and going. With no coming and going, no passing away and arising. With no passing away and arising, there is neither this world, the other world, nor a between the two. This is the end of suffering. Another account describes the Buddha correcting the view of Brahma. In brief, at one time, this pernicious view arose in the Brahma named Bhakka. This abode of Brahma is permanent, enduring, and eternal. It is absolute and imperishable. This abode of Brahma is not born. It does not originate, age, die, or pass away. A superior salvation cannot be found. The Buddha, knowing Bhakka's thought, went to him and said, Brahma, you have lapsed into ignorance. Therefore, you claim that which is impermanent as permanent, unstable as enduring, and uneternal as eternal, ... And there being a superior salvation, you claim there is none. Then Mara possessed one of Brahma's retinue, who spoke to the Buddha. Bhikkhu, do not offend Brahma. Do not offend Brahma. This is Brahma, the great Brahma, the Lord, the unvanquished, the all-seeing one, the omnipotent, the sovereign, the maker, the creator, excellent, providence, the master, father of those born and to be born. The Buddha admonished Mara, finishing with, Brahma and all his company and retinue are in your hands, are in your power, ... But I have not fallen into your hands, nor am I under your power. When Bhakka maintained, I have declared the permanent as permanent, the enduring as enduring, the eternal as eternal, ... The Buddha announced that there are many things that Brahma does not know, including the state that can be known, not seen with the eyes, limitless, and all radiant, which the solidity of earth cannot hold, the wetness of water, the heat of fire, the movement of wind cannot hold, the existence of beings, the divinity of devas, the rule of Pajapati, the grandeur of Brahma, the brilliance of Abhasara Brahma, the beauty of the Subhahinka Brahmas, the abundance of the Vihaphala Brahmas cannot hold. The lordship of the Lord cannot hold. The characteristics of all things cannot hold. Bhakka replied to this by saying that he would vanish from sight, but he was unable to do so. The Buddha in turn said he would vanish and did vanish. Brahma and his retinue could only hear his voice speaking. Having seen the danger in being and seen the existence of those who seek non-being, I do not praise any sort of being nor cling to delight, i.e. bhavatanha, the craving for beings. MI 3:27-8. Another story tells of a bhikkhu who traveled through every realm until he reached the Brahma world, seeking an answer to a question. This bhikkhu had the following doubt. Where are the four great elements, earth, water, fire, and air, extinguished without remainder? He then entered a state of concentration and visited the various deities, beginning with the realm of the four great kings to pose his question. Unable to answer him, the gods suggested he go progressively higher heaven realms until he arrived at the Brahma world. The Brahmas too could not answer him, but said that the great Brahma, the Lord, would surely know. With a splendid radiance, the great Brahma revealed himself to that bhikkhu. The bhikkhu posed his question to the great Brahma, who prevaricated, I am Brahma, great Brahma, the Lord, the unvanquished, the all-seeing one, the omnipotent, the sovereign, the maker, the creator, excellent providence, the master, father of those born and to be born. The bhikkhu continued, I did not ask you if you are Brahma, great Brahma, the Lord, ... I ask you where the four great elements are extinguished without remainder. Brahma replied again that he is a great Brahma, the Lord, etc. The bhikkhu asked again for a third time, at which point Brahma took him by the arm and led him to one side, saying, Monk, these gods, followers of Brahman, recognize me as one for whom there is nothing not known, seen, experienced, or realized. Therefore, I did not answer in front of them. Monk, I also do not know where the four great elements are extinguished without remainder. It is thus your misdeed and mistake that you have abandoned the Blessed One and come to search for an answer to this problem elsewhere. Go and approach the Blessed One to pose this question and accept whatever answer he gives. The bhikkhu then went to ask the Buddha, who answered, You should not ask, where are the four great elements, earth, water, fire, and air, extinguished without remainder? You should ask, where can earth, water, fire, and air find no footing? Where can long and short, small and large, beautiful and repulsive find no firm ground? Where do mentality and corporality terminate without remainder? He then answered as follows. The state that can be known, vijnana, is not seen with the eyes, and adasana is limitless, anatta, and can be reached from every direction, sabatobaha. Here, earth, water, fire, and air can find no footing, long and short, fine and coarse, beautiful and repulsive, can find no firm ground, mentality and corporality terminate without remainder, because since consciousness ceases, mentality and corporality terminate here. DI 21523, and I'll just read that last paragraph one more time. The state that can be known is not seen with the eyes, is limitless, and can be reached from every direction. Here, earth, water, fire, and air can find no footing. Long and short, fine and coarse, beautiful and repulsive can find no firm ground. Mentality and corporality terminate without remainder, because since consciousness ceases, mentality and corporality terminate here. DI 215-23. These descriptions of Nibbāna have resulted in various interpretations and debates. Some scholars interpret the last two passages as a Buddhist attempt to combat Brahmanism by assimilation, by incorporating the Brahmanic personification of God. Note that in all these passages, the Buddha was neither teaching bhikkhus who had a basic knowledge of Dhamma, or was he speaking to Brahma, who is a master theoretician. I will not elaborate upon these details here, but remember that this disparity of interpretation arises because Nibbāna cannot be conceived of. It must be known directly through spiritual practice. Pali words are sometimes translated differently. The word ayatana in the first passage, for example, can be translated as sphere. Ayatana in the first passages, for example, can be translated as sphere, and some interpret this to mean a dwelling place. Others interpret ayatana as another dimension. The term vijnana in passages 5 and 6 is considered by some to be identical with vijnana in the expression eye vijnana, ear vijnana, etc. They thus interpret Nibbāna as some form of consciousness, defining Nibbāna as a consciousness that is not seen with the eyes, etc. In the commentaries, however, vijnana is explained in this passage to be a name for Nibbāna, the state that cannot be known, as used above. We can see that in passage 6, the words vijnana occur twice. The first vijnana refers to Nibbāna with its own distinct translation, the state that can be known, while the later vijnana is in the phrase vijnana ceases, refers to the consciousness that is the condition for the arising of mentality and corporality, as explained in dependent origination. We should refrain from drawing conclusions about Nibbāna simply because an interpretation accords with our preferences and preconceptions. If we establish firm convictions about something we do not yet clearly know, we may be greatly deceived. Rather, we should emphasize those methods leading to Nibbāna along with the benefits of gradual liberation. This is more practical. As our spiritual practice develops, we will clearly see the results for ourselves. The following quote is an affirmation by the Buddha that the realization of Nibbāna and other sublime states can truly occur when the eye of wisdom opens. This is the Buddha's conversation with the Brahma student Subha. The Buddha refutes the Brahma Pokharasati's assertion that it is impossible for humans to experience superlative knowledge and vision. Nanadasana. Young man, suppose there were a person blind from birth who could not see black forms, white forms, green, yellow, red, or pink forms, and he could not see even and uneven forms, the stars, the moon, or the sun. Were he to say that black and white forms do not exist, and beholders of black and white forms do not exist, that green forms do not exist, and beholders of green forms do not exist, that the moon and sun do not exist, and beholders of the moon and sun do not exist, were he to say, I do not know or see these things, therefore they do not exist, would he be speaking correctly? Incorrectly, the young man replied. The Buddha then continued, just so, the Brahman Pokharasati of the Opamana clan, lord of the Subhaga Grove, is blind and visionless. That he could know, see, or realize outstanding knowledge and vision, which is competent, excellent, and superhuman, is impossible. MII 201 to 202. Although we may have considered these explanations in Nibbāna, if we have not practiced and arrived at this state, we should remember that all ideas of Nibbāna are comparable to the images the blind men formed after touching the elephant. The story from the Pali in brief as follows. At one time in the city of Savatthi, a large number of religious ascetics, wanderers, and Brahmins of various creeds adhered to their own beliefs and doctrines as the only truth, while repudiating those of others. This gave rise to quarreling. The truth is this way, not that way. The truth is not that way. It is this way. In response, the Buddha told the following story. In former times, the king of Savatthi ordered his advisors to gather all those men in the city who were blind from birth and present them with an elephant. The advisors showed one group of blind men the elephant's head. To another, they showed the elephant's ear. They showed the tusks to another group, the trunk, the abdomen, the legs, the back, the tail, the tip of the tail to each respective group, saying each time that this is an elephant. They then informed the king that the blind men had become familiar with the elephant. The king went to the gathering of the blind and asked them, have you seen the elephant? They replied, we have, your majesty. The king inquired further, as you say you have seen the elephant, describe it to me. Those blind men who had touched the head said that an elephant is like a water pot. Those who had felt the ears said the elephant is like a winnowing basket. Those who had touched the tusk, a plowshare. Those who had touched the trunk, a plow shaft. Those who had touched the abdomen said the elephant is like a granary. Those who had touched the legs claimed it is like a pillar. Those who had touched the back, a mortar. Those who had touched the tail, a pedestal. Those who had touched the tip of the tail said an elephant is like a broom. When this was finished, the blind man began to argue. An elephant is this way, not that way. An elephant is not that way. It is this way, to the point of brawling. At the end, the Buddha uttered this verse. Indeed, some ascetics and Brahmins cling to such views and doctrines. People who see only one part, being contentious, argue, and quarrel. UD 67 to 68. 6.4. Elements of Nibbāna. The discussion so far has focused on Nibbāna as an absolute and transcendent quality. It is possible, however, to distinguish different kinds of Nibbāna. Essentially only one Nibbāna exists. It is divided into categories in order to describe the characteristics of persons in contact with Nibbāna, or to describe various properties of Nibbāna itself. A widely known division of Nibbāna from the Iti Phuttaka is into the two elements of Nibbāna, Nibbāna Dhatu. Number one, Sa Upatissa sisa sa upadi esa Nibbāna dhatu, Nibbāna with remaining upadi, fuel. And number 2, anupadi sisa Nibbāna dhatu, Nibbāna with no remaining fuel. The commentaries define the distinguishing factor here, upadi, as the 5 aggregates, pancha kanda, in the sense that they are governed by impure actions or are subject to grasping. The definitions of these terms based on this interpretation are: number 1, sa upadisa Nibbāna dhatu, Nibbāna linked with the 5 aggregates, or Nibbāna with the 5 aggregates still remaining, and 2, anupadisa Nibbāna dhatu, Nibbāna free from the 5 aggregates. Here is the passage where these 2 terms appear in the Itivuttaka. This was said by the Blessed and Fully Enlightened One. So I have heard. Bhikkhus, there are these 2 elements in Nibbāna, namely Nibbāna with fuel remaining and Nibbāna with no fuel remaining. And what is Nibbāna with fuel remaining? Bhikkhus, there is the case of a monk who is an arhat, with taints destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what has had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the true goal, destroyed the fetters of being, and is completely liberated through final knowledge. His 5 sense faculties still remain, and owing to their being intact, he experiences the agreeable and the disagreeable. He feels both pleasure and pain. His ending of lust, hatred, and delusion is termed the Nibbāna with fuel remaining. And what is the Nibbāna with no fuel remaining? There is the case of an arhat with taints destroyed, who is completely liberated through final knowledge. For him, all that is felt, Vedayita, and not being delighted in, Nahinandita, not being infatuated with, will become cool right here. This is termed Nibbāna with no fuel remaining. One with vision, secure and free, has proclaimed the dual elements of Nibbāna. One element, present and visible, is called Nibbāna with fuel remaining. Exhausted are the taints, conduits to renewed existence. The other, the supreme state, is Nibbāna with no remaining fuel, in which all becoming totally ceases. IT 38 through 9. This passage, introducing the 2 elements, describes the quality of association with Nibbāna. That is, it describes Nibbāna in connection to enlightened beings. It uses enlightened beings as means to understand Nibbāna. It does not attempt to explain Nibbāna in an absolute sense. This is because Nibbāna is senditika, to be seen for oneself, and is pachatam vedatam vinuhi, to be experienced individually by the wise, as mentioned earlier. Therefore, this division of Nibbāna does not introduce anything different or mysterious into the earlier examination of the nature of Nibbāna. As the commentators say, Nibbāna is essentially indivisible. The division is a didactic tool. Before looking more closely at the 2 kinds of Nibbāna, let us familiarize ourselves with 3 important terms. Number 1, Vedayita. This term stems from the same root as Vedana, and in some cases is used as a substitute for Vedana. It refers to sense experience or to sense impressions. Here the plural is Vedayitani, which refers to all objects that have been sensed or cognized. It is equivalent to what people nowadays refer to as their whole range of experience. Number 2, Anahinandita. This term used above as a qualifying adjective for Vedayita is derived from Hinadita, which means pleasing or delightful. In this context, Abhinandita implies infatuation and a heart adulterated by craving, and it applies to both positive and negative experiences. to delight in aversion. Adding the negative prefix an, the meaning becomes not infatuated. In this case, craving does not accompany sense impressions. Sense experience occurs in a pure, spacious, and unobstructed way, free from fretting and brooding. One does not distort or deviate from direct sense experience because the mind is not controlled or overwhelmed by greed, hatred, and delusion. Number 3, Buddhadhamma. Literally, this word means visible or visible object. In reference to time, it means in the present or in this life. In reference to objects or mental states, it means common, mundane, basic, material, or exterior. It is generally paired with samparayika, which literally means further or beyond. In relation to time, it means future, later, beyond this life, or in the next world. In other contexts, it means transcendent, supreme, sacred, spiritual, or internal. At this point, let us look more closely at the two kinds of Nibbāna. Sa upadisisa. Nibbāna Dhatu refers to Nibbāna connected to the 5 aggregates. It is the Nibbāna of arhats as they cognize sense objects, pleasurable and painful through the senses. Cognition is extricably linked with the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are directly involved in sense experience, and the aggregates themselves become further objects of cognition. This aspect of Nibbāna highlights arhat's contact with the world. It focuses on the end of greed, hatred, and delusion, which leads to an unobstructed experience of life. Sa upadisisa Nibbāna Dhatu is the arhat's liberated state of mind free from defilements. Arhats are not influenced by defilements, and therefore sense contact does not give rise to craving, either as coveting or aversion. Additionally, no craving exists that leads to renewed existence, bhava neti. An arhat with unimpaired sense faculties is thus able to receive sense impressions freely and with wisdom. This free state of mind has 2 facets. The first is the ability to receive sense impressions as pure feeling, Vedana, since there are no residual attachments or obsessions to interfere. The second is not being overwhelmed by experience, and thus one does not form future habits of attachment or infatuation. For arhats, this is the ordinary, usual state of mind. It is immediate and accessible in every moment of sense contact. Therefore, it is called Buddhadhamma, visible or immediate. This type of Nibbāna is the state of arhats while they are still alive and in contact with the external world. Anupadisisa Nibbāna Dhatu is the Nibbāna independent of the 5 aggregates. It is the Nibbāna beyond the process of experiencing phenomena through the 5 senses, or over and above the 5 aggregates engaged in cognition. It is the Nibbāna transcending mundane reality, transcending sense contact and experience. In other words, Anupadisisa Nibbāna Dhatu is the essential nature of Nibbāna, which is revealed to arhats when experience by way of the 5 senses cease, when cognition ceases, or when there is no involvement with sense contact, including input from the 5 senses still remaining in the mind. The arhat receives sense impressions without craving-induced delight, without the inflaming influence of greed, hatred, and delusion. Sense impressions do not linger and smolder. They become cool. They become completely peaceful and detoxified. And they are unable to lead to future birth or becoming. Arhats are capable of neutralizing any obstructive potential of sense experience, cooling and mastering it. They therefore acquire the epithet Siti Bhuta or Sitta, meaning one who is cooled. This state of clarity, absent of residual sense experience, is internal and personal. It is the state of non-becoming or of no renewed existence. In this state, where the five aggregates are no longer objects of awareness, arhats have Nibbāna as their object. They realize Nibbāna as a Dhammayatana. This quality can only be discussed in its relational context by saying that ordinary mundane experience ceases. The essential, absolute nature of Nibbāna can only be seen and realized for oneself. An analogy for this division of Nibbāna is to being shipwrecked in the ocean. An unenlightened person is swimming, struggling against the waves and current. A person who has realized Nibbāna has reached dry land. The arrival at land where one is perfectly satisfied and at ease is like anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, the absence of oppression and danger, not being battered by the waves, being able to engage with things freely, being able to move about as one wishes, is like sa upadisisa Nibbāna dhatu. One can also compare an unenlightened person to someone suffering a fever. An enlightened person is someone who has recovered from fever or is in perfect health. Good health is inherently complete. When one is healthy, one knows this state for oneself. The contentment, joy, and ease and relief is purely subjective. Others observing from outside may conjecture on that state, but they are unable to experience it directly. This state of well-being is like anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, the related condition which affects behavior and influences a person's surrounding, that is, of not being oppressed or impeded by illness and being able to act as one wishes, is like sa upadisisa Nibbāna dhatu. To summarize, there is only one Nibbāna, but with two aspects. One aspect, sa upadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, focuses on the end of defilements, which has a bearing on the relationship to the outside world or on everyday life. The second, anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, is limited to Nibbāna's essential nature, which is realized solely by enlightened beings. It cannot be fathomed by way of the five senses and is beyond experience confined to the five aggregates. In other words, in sa upadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, arhats have the five aggregates as the object of attention. In anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu, arhats have Nibbāna as the object of attention. To say anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu is Nibbāna's essential nature is comparable with the commentarial opinion found in the Buddhadhamma, which describes Mataha Nibbāna dhatu, deathless Nibbāna element, as anupadisisa, with no remaining fuel. It is also consistent with the Buddha's words, monks, there exists that sphere, ayatana, where there is neither the earth, water, fire, or air elements, nor the realm of infinite space, ... Elsewhere, the commentaries and subcommentaries point out that anupadisisa Nibbāna dhatu is identical to anupada paranibbāna, final absolute Nibbāna, which is the goal of Dhamma practice and comprises the highest realization in Buddhism. In most cases, cognition by way of the five senses and contact with the external world clearly and decisively ends at death. With the utter end of sense contact at death, arhats realize the indivisible aspect of Nibbāna, i.e., anupadisisa Nibbāna. Colloquial, the term anupadisisa Nibbāna is used as an expression for the death of an arhat. From a word denoting quality, anupadisisa Nibbāna came to refer to an action or event. Where this word is found elsewhere in the scriptures, it refers to the death of the Buddha or of the arhats. As for the term Sa upadi sisa nibbāna in the Tipitaka, it is not used to describe an event and is found only in this one passage of the Itivutaka. There are synonyms of sa upadi sisa nibbāna that are used frequently. There are many passages in the Tipitaka where the term anupadi sisa nibbāna dhatu is used alone. For example, in the Buddha's comparison of the Dhamma Vinaya to the marvels of the ocean. Just as the great ocean, neither a decrease nor an increase will appear though rain falls into it from the sky, even so, even if many monks attain final Nibbāna in the Nibbāna element that is without remainder, there is no decrease or increase in the Nibbāna element that is without remainder. VIN II 239-40, AIV 202-203, and UD 55. The Maha Nadisa refers to Anupadi Sisa Nibbāna as Anabhinabhati Samagi, meaning fully prepared to not be reborn. The accounts in the Pali Canon of the Buddha's life frequently use the term Anupadi Sisa Nibbāna dhatu each time in reference to the Buddha's final Nibbāna at death. For example, the Buddha claimed that his complexion is particularly resplendent on two occasions: on the night of his enlightenment and on the day of his final Nibbāna in the Nibbāna element without remainder. Alms food offered to the Buddha is exceptionally meritorious on two occasions: the meal offered before his enlightenment and the meal before his final Nibbāna in the Nibbāna element without remainder. There are further examples. The location of the Buddha's final Nibbāna in the Nibbāna element without remainder is one of the four Buddhist holy places. The Buddha's final Nibbāna in the Nibbāna element without remainder is one cause for the earth to quake. Another passage explains that the Buddha is called the Tathagata because between the night in which the Buddha gains supreme enlightenment and the night in which he attains the Nibbāna element without remainder, whatever he proclaims, says, or explains is so and not otherwise. DIII 135, IT 121-2, ND 241. There are many other scriptural passages with a similar theme and an identical sequence to the teaching on the two kinds of Nibbāna above. The only difference is that they do not distinguish these two kinds of Nibbāna. For the sake of comparison, here are some examples. A. When a bhikkhu has abandoned ignorance and aroused true knowledge, then, with the discarding of ignorance and the arising of true knowledge, he does not generate a meritorious volitional formation or a demeritorious volitional formation or an imperturbable volitional formation. Since he does not generate or fashion volitional formations, he does not cling to anything in the world. Not clinging, he is not agitated. Not being agitated, he personally attains Nibbāna. He understands, destroyed his birth, the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. B. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not indulged in. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels painful feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not indulged in. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands it is not permanent. He understands it is not indulged in. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a neither pleasant nor painful feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a feeling limited by the body by way of the five physical sense doors, he understands, I feel a feeling limited by the body. When he feels a feeling limited by life by way of the mind door, he understands, I feel a feeling limited by life. He understands with the breaking up of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here at the 12 sense spheres. Mere bodily remains will be left. C. Suppose, bhikkhus, a person would remove a hot clay pot from a potter's kiln and set it on the smooth ground. Its heat would be dissipated right there, and the fired pot would be left. So too, when he feels a feeling limited to the body, limited to life, he understands with the breakup of the body following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt not being delighted in will become cool right here. Mere bodily remains will be left. Paragraphs A, B, and C, SII 82 to 83. D. Bhikkhus, just as an oil lamp burns in dependence on the oil and the wick, and with the exhaustion of the oil and the wick, it is extinguished through lack of fuel, so too when a bhikkhu feels a feeling limited to the body, limited to life, he understands with the breakup of the body following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt not being delighted in will become cool right here. MIII 244 to 5, SIII 126, SIV 213, SV 319 to 20. There is, however, one passage with a varying description and analogy. The monk whose heart is perfectly released attains 6 constant abiding states. Seeing a form with the eye, he is neither elated nor depressed, but rest equanimous, mindful, and clearly comprehending. Hearing a sound with the ear, smelling a scent with the nose, tasting a savor with the tongue, contacting a tangible with the body, cognizing mental states with the mind, he is neither elated nor depressed, but rest equanimous, mindful, and clearly comprehending. When he feels a feeling limited by the body, he understands I feel a feeling limited by the body. When he feels a feeling limited by life, he understands I feel a feeling limited by life. He understands with the breakup of the body following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. Suppose that a shadow is cast by a tree. Along comes a man with an axe and basket and cuts the tree at the trunk. He then digs and pulls out the roots, even the rootlets and root fibers. He chops that tree into logs, and having done so, chops the logs into chips. The chips he dries in the wind and sun, and then burns them with fire and makes an ash heap. The ashes he winnows in a strong wind, or lets them be carried away by a swiftly flowing river. That shadow cast by the tree is cut off by the root, made like a palm tree stump, made not to become again, of a nature not to arise again. In the same way, a monk whose heart is perfectly released attains 6 constant abiding states, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. AII 198 to 9. For a thorough understanding of the 2 kinds of Nibbāna, let us go back and examine the commentarial explanations. As mentioned earlier, the term Anupadisisa Nibbāna is used in the Pali Canon to describe an event, the death of an arhat, in particular of the Buddha. However, the commentaries begin to use the term Saupadisisa Nibbāna to describe an event as well, as can be seen by comparing 2 passages describing the same event. Pali Canon. These 2 almsgivings are a very great fruit, a very great result, more fruitful and advantageous than any other. Which 2? The one is the almsgiving after eating, which the Tathagata attains supreme enlightenment. The other, that after which he attains the Nibbāna element without remainder at his final passing. DII 135 to 6, UD 85. Commentary. The Buddha, having eaten the alms food offered by Sujata, attained the supreme enlightenment of Nibbāna element without remainder. Having eaten the alms food offered by Kunda, he attained the Nibbāna element without remainder at his final passing. DAII 571, UDA 405. With the development of meaning of these 2 terms, they were applied in many commentarial passages to indicate events in the life of the Buddha or the Arhats. They are used to emphasize the realization of certain states rather than the nature of the states themselves. From the commentarial perspective, the meaning of these two kinds of Nibbāna is restricted. Sa-upadhisisa Nibbāna here refers to the extinguishing of defilements with the 5 aggregates remaining, to the Nibbāna of an arhat while still alive, that is, to the attainment of arhatship. Anupadhisisa Nibbāna refers to the ending of defilements with no aggregates remaining, that is, to the death of an arhat. The commentators define Anupadhisisa Nibbāna in particular by applying the principle of final mind or final consciousness, limiting the meaning to refer to an arhat's death. The commentaries interpret canonical passages relating to arhats by distinguishing between Sa-upadhisisa Nibbāna and Anupadhisisa Nibbāna, for example, from the canon. Because of the utter end of craving, its remainderless fading away in cessation. This is Nibbāna. For a monk who has thus been quenched, free from grasping, there is no renewed birth. U.D. 33. The commentaries assert that this first sentence of this passage refers to the Nibbāna element with remainder, and the second sentence refers to the Nibbāna element without remainder. This interpretation accords with the canonical passages presented earlier. Combining these commentarial explanations, we can summarize the meaning of these two kinds of Nibbāna as follows. The Nibbāna element with remainder is the end of defilement and craving, leading to harmless, peaceful, and beneficial interaction with the world, and relates to awakening or arhatship. The Nibbāna element without remainder is the end of being bound to the 5 aggregates, of mental proliferation, of birth and continued existence, and it relates to the end of life in the world. The Nibbāna relating to the activity of the 5 sense faculties is Sa-upadhisisa Nibbāna. The Nibbāna free from the 5 sense faculties is Anupadhisisa Nibbāna. In short, the end of defilement is Sa-upadhisisa Nibbāna, and the end of birth is Anupadhisisa Nibbāna. See Note 6.4. Note 6.4, constant Nibbāna. In a manner of speaking, one can say that Anupadhisisa Nibbāna is the state of Nibbāna that is constant, both throughout an arhat's life and after death. Sa-upadhisisa Nibbāna is the superficial state of Nibbāna, as if overlapping, existing between the time of full enlightenment and death. When an arhat dies, only Anupadhisisa Nibbāna remains. This explanation, however, may be deviating from the practical emphasis of Buddhadhamma, veering in the direction of philosophical reasoning. The first term, back to the main text, the first term refers to the Nibbāna of an arhat who is still alive. All mental impurities have been removed, but the 5 aggregates still exist. This corresponds with the term coined by the commentators, Kilesa Paranibbāna, eradication of defilements. The second term refers to the Nibbāna of an arhat after death, corresponding with the commentarial term Khandha Paranibbāna, release from the aggregates. In fact, the evidence in the Pali Canon shows that not much significance was given to these two kinds of Nibbāna. What are highlighted are the things that can be applied to realize Nibbāna clearly for oneself. Lengthy theorizing on these two kinds of Nibbāna is likely to complicate a matter that is actually straightforward and may lead to students of Buddhism overemphasizing their importance. If the examination of the nature of Nibbāna becomes too technical, there is a risk that people will form misleading conceptions. This is because the person presenting the explanation may not translate important words accurately and clearly, and the person receiving the teachings may have a limited understanding about terms or points of Dhamma. The misunderstanding may be reinforced by people's emotions. For example, one may read the technical terms above and form an impression of an arhat as someone heartless and indifferent. Therefore, to prevent such misunderstandings, it is important to accompany the study of theoretical teachings with practical application to see how theory and practice complement one another. and an examination into the essential meaning of theoretical teachings and their expression as real human attributes reveals how these teachings, which may at first seem contradictory, are compatible and mutually supportive. 6.5. Jhana, Nirodha, and Nibbāna. At this point, let us examine another way of distinguishing kinds of Nibbāna. Besides stating that the attainment of jhana is a good basis for realizing Nibbāna, the Buddha sometimes used the term jhana to imply Nibbāna or to show related features. For example, the Buddha referred to the 4 fine material jhanas, the 4 immaterial jhanas, and the cessation of perception and feeling, sanya, vedayita, nirodha, as temporary Nibbāna. Danga Nibbāna, alternatively Nibbāna by substitution of opposites. Visible Nibbāna, Buddhadhamma Nibbāna, and Nibbāna to be seen by oneself, Sanditika Nibbāna, respectively. Further examples of Nibbāna being used in connection with spiritual attainments include, quote, a bhikkhu secluded from sensual pleasure, secluded from unwholesome states, attains the first jhana. Even this much the Blessed One calls direct Nibbāna by representation. Going beyond, going beyond the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, by seeing with wisdom, all cankers are destroyed. Even this much the Blessed One calls direct, immediate Nibbāna. A practitioner of insight meditation understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness as impermanent, subject to stress, and subject to change. He abandons sorrow, lamentation, etc., is freed from agitation and worry, and dwells happily. He is said to be quenched in that respect. Danga Nibbāna, SIII 43. When a person is overwhelmed by lust, hatred, and delusion, then he plans for his own harm, for the harm of others, for the harm of both. And he experiences in his mind suffering and grief. But when lust, hatred, and delusion have been abandoned, he neither plans for his own harm, nor for the harm of others, not for the harm of both. And he does not experience in his mind suffering and grief. In this way, Nibbāna is directly visible, timeless, inviting one to come and see, to be brought within and realized, to be personally experienced by the wise. AI 158-9. The Patisamhita divides Nirodha, which is an important synonym for Nibbāna, into 5 categories. Number 1, Vikhamhana Nirodha, the suppression of the 5 hindrances in the first jhana. In fact, all 8 concentrative attainments, samapatti, i.e. the 4 fine material and the 4 immaterial jhanas, count as Vikhamhana Nirodha, because while abiding in all these states, unwholesome qualities, for example, the hindrances, are temporarily stilled. Number 2, Tadanga Nirodha, the stage at which concentration samadhi begins to dispel the defilements. Wrong views are vanquished by the substitution of opposite qualities. This stage implies the dispelling of defilements through insight and the use of wisdom to examine the true nature of things. For example, the nature of impermanence. Whatever truth is focused on, knowledge arises to eliminate antagonistic views and attachments. For example, seeing oneself or others as merely mind and body, namarupa, dispels the view of fixed identity, sakkaya ditthi. Observing impermanence dispels the perception of permanence, nicca sana. Acknowledging dukkha dispels the perception of unchanging happiness, sukha sana. And reflecting on selflessness dispels the perception of a fixed self, Attasana. This cessation is similar to turning on a light and dispelling darkness, but it is still a temporary cessation. As soon as the light is extinguished, darkness returns. 3. Samucceda Nirodha, the cutting off of defilements by one who develops the supramundane paths. Lokuttara Magga, i.e. the paths of stream entry. Sotapanna Magga, once returning. Sakadagami Magga, non-returning. Anagami Magga, and Arhatship, Arahata Magga. The defilements, for example, the 10 fetters, cease irrevocably, never to return, like a tree that has been uprooted or shattered by lightning. Number 4, Patipassadi Nirodha, the utter stilling of defilements at the moment of supramundane fruition. Lokuttara Phala, the noble fruition of stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and arhatship. This is a state of profound tranquility due to the complete removal of mental impurity. And number 5, Nisarana Nirodha, the release from defilements, an abiding untouched by defilement. This cessation is equivalent to Nibbāna, also called Anatta Dhatu, deathless element, the state of deliverance. The first 2 qualities, Vikhamana and Danga Nirodha, are mundane. The remaining 3 are supramundane. The first 4 qualities are called Nibbāna indirectly, or in some respects, Parayaya. The 5th quality refers to Nibbāna directly, Niparayaya, it in its full and true meaning. The Pati Samhindamagga divides Pahana, abandoning, Viveka, seclusion, Viraga, dispassion, and Visaga, release, each into the 5 identical qualities as with Nirodha above, with identical definitions and meanings. The commentaries divide Vimutti, liberation, in the same way. A well-known division into realizations of Nibbāna is the division into path, Magga, and fruit, Phala, or into the 4 paths and 4 fruits, i.e. Sotapanna Magga, Sotapanna Phala, Sakadagami Magga, Sakadagami Phala, Anagami Magga, Anagami Phala, Arahata Magga, and Arahata Phala. This division, however, is made in connection with enlightened beings who will be discussed in the next chapter. At this point, let me simply remind the reader that Magga and Phala are not Nibbāna, but rather stages or levels of realization. 6.6. Anatta and Nibbāna. Several misunderstandings exist about Nibbāna and its relationship to the principle of non-self. Anatta, the word anatta often becomes linked with beliefs from other religious traditions. There are 2 such beliefs in particular. First, the theory of union with the supreme reality or being, for example with Brahma, God, or higher consciousness. This theory propounds the inseparable dissolving into or joining of the self with the supreme reality. This state of union is then called non-self. The second belief is the resolute dedication of service to a divinity with no concern for oneself, with no selfish desire. A person practicing this way is said to be selfless, and such practice is seen as identical to the anatta of Buddhism. In truth, these 2 beliefs are alien to the Buddhist teaching of non-self, as there are almost no common features comparing them with the Buddhist understanding of non-self is flawed. Anatta in Buddhism is a characteristic of all things, a truth pertaining to all existence. This principle is to be investigated with wisdom and understood that especially all things are insubstantial. Things exist and proceed according to their own nature. They possess no core, hidden essence, overlapping reality, or controlling agent, which can validly be clung to as a self. A lucid understanding, jnana or vijja, of this leads to a liberated heart, which is not encumbered or enslaved by anything. This is liberation by way of wisdom. Nibbāna vimutti. In this sense, anatta is not a matter of an existent self dissolving into or unifying with anything. Some people equate a union with a supreme being or higher consciousness with Nibbāna. Putting these claims aside, even some idiomatic phrases in Buddhist circles can cause confusion and lead to misunderstanding. For example, attaining final Nibbāna and reaching the great deathless citadel of Nibbāna. Why introduce abstruse and ambiguous theories from other sources to make one's understanding even more muddled? Normally, the Buddhist teachings use simple, easy-to-understand expressions when explaining Nibbāna. For example, the end of impurity, the end of agitation, and a heart that is free, unrestricted, griefless, bright, and joyous. These descriptions are sufficient. One need not merge or unify with anything. An arhat's heart is spacious, limitless, and perfectly free. No thought arises about becoming one with anything. On the contrary, it is unenlightened people who conjecture on an arhat state of mind, which more likely reveals their longing for certainty, fear of extinction, and lingering doubt. The equation of Nibbāna with losing oneself into a supreme entity that involves the mind ceasing to consciously engage and entering a trance-like state is also false. For even in the correct practice of jhana, in which the mind is deeply concentrated and one-pointed, mindfulness is still clearly established and mental agility is enhanced. It is not a trance. The fourth jhana in particular is endowed with the attribute equanimity that purifies mindfulness. Upekkha, sati, pari, suddhim. And in relation to penetrative knowledge, descriptions of the fourth jhana end with this passage. With mind concentrated, purified and cleansed, unblemished, free from impurities, malleable, workable, established, and having gained imperturbability, one directs and inclines one's mind towards knowing and seeing. D.I. 76. There is a general criterion one can use in light of this discussion, regardless of how deeply absorbed the mind is in an exalted state, or to what level it has merged with a supreme truth, as long as the mental impurities have not been eradicated by wisdom, which discerns conditionality in the true nature of the world. That is, as long as one has not reached deliverance by wisdom, Nibbāna vimutti, one cannot yet claim to have attained Nibbāna. Without this deliverance, the profound and absorptive states remain confined to psychic or concentrative achievements, and the release from the clutches of defilement is merely a temporary suppression or abeyance, lasting only so long as the force of mind can be maintained. The principle of selfless or altruistic conduct is also not the same as anatta. There is a similarity in that a clear discernment of anatta brings about an end of selfishness. Indeed, selfishness is only truly uprooted with insight into the nature of non-self. Both understanding selflessness and a humble submission to a deity lead to selfless conduct. The similarity extends this far. The first is a wise investigation of truth, leading to liberation. The second is an application of faith, leading to intense devotion to the object of that faith, not distracted by personal concerns. We may then ask the question, which of these practices is a temporary self-abandonment, and which an utter and complete removal of self-preoccupation? The term anatta can be applied in a practical context regarding selfless behavior. Here the term refers to the possession of mindfulness and clear comprehension, leading to thorough self-understanding. The mind is fully aware of the activity in which it is engaged to the extent that no opportunity arises for concepts of a fixed identity to impinge and hijack the process of awareness. In this context, anatta means knowing the insubstantiability of all things. Finally, it is common for contemporary Buddhists to use expressions relating to the self, atta, and non-self in an ethical context. For example, this person has a strong ego. deflate or annihilate your ego. He acts to boost his ego. These colloquial expressions simply refer to a fixed belief in self or to an adherence to a self-image. They are used for convenience. They are not meant to imply an actual existing self. The common and widespread use of these expressions, however, leads some people to confuse or distort the meaning of anatta to the extent that it strays entirely from its original Buddhist connotation. 6.7. Value and unique attributes of Nibbāna. A. Nibbāna is attainable in this lifetime. Nibbāna, the highest goal of Buddhism, can be realized by people in this present life when they apply effort and are endowed with the necessary spiritual qualities. One need not wait until the next life, as revealed by the dual attributes of Nibbāna. Sanditiko, seen clearly by oneself, realizable in this life, and Akaliko, not subject to time, timeless, immediate. The Buddha offered ways of practice for realizing Nibbāna in this present life, as confirmed in this passage. I tell you this, let a wise person come to me who is sincere, honest, and straightforward, and I will instruct him. I will teach him Dhamma. If he practices what he is taught, then within 7 years, by realizing for himself here and now, through direct knowledge, he will enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness, let alone 7 years, in 6 years, 5 years, ... In a fortnight, in 7 days, he can achieve that goal. DIII 55 to 56. B. Nibbāna is attainable by all. Every person with determination and spiritual aptitude can realize Nibbāna. No restrictions exist concerning race, class, caste, wealth, gender, or whether one is a householder or monastic, as verified by the Buddha's verses. The straight way, that path is called, and fearless is its destination. The chariot is called silent, fitted with wheels of righteousness. A sense of shame is its rear guard, mindfulness its armor. I say, this Dhamma vehicle has right view, guiding it as charioteer. One who has such a vehicle, whether a woman or a man, has, by means of this vehicle, arrived at the abode of Nibbāna. SI 33. The Buddha permitted women to be ordained as bhikkhuni. Despite the opposition by elements of Indian society at that time, he claimed that women who follow the Dhamma Vinaya are capable of realizing supramundane states from stream entry to arhatship equally as men. At one time, Soma Bhikkhuni was sitting at the foot of a tree when Mara approached, and wanting to disturb and frighten her, exclaimed in verse, "That state so hard to achieve, which is to be attained by the seers, cannot be attained by a woman with her two-fingered wisdom." Soma Theri replied, "What does womanhood matter at all? When the mind is concentrated well, when knowledge flows on steadily, seeing correctly into Dhamma, one to whom it might occur, I am a woman, or I am a man, or I am anything at all, is fit for Mara to address." SI 129 THIG verses 60 to 62. In relation to householders and monastics, the Buddha had this to say, "I do not praise the wrong way of practice on the part either of a householder or one gone forth, for whether it be a householder or one gone forth, one who has entered on the wrong way of practice by reason of his wrong way of practice is not accomplishing the true way, the Dhamma that is wholesome. I praise the right way of practice on the part either of a householder or one gone forth, for whether it be a householder or one gone forth, one who has entered on the right way of practice by reason of his right way of practice is accomplishing the true way, the Dhamma that is wholesome." MII 197, CFSV 18 to 19. I say there is no difference between a lay follower who is thus liberated in mind and a bhikkhu who has been liberated in mind for 100 years. That is, the one liberation is the same as the other. SV 410. The Buddha frequently discussed the issue of caste, which was an important point of debate and controversy in India at that time. One example is the discussion between the Buddha and the Brahman as Sukari. Master Gotama, the Brahmins prescribe 4 types of wealth, ... They prescribe wandering for alms as the wealth of a Brahmin, ... The bow and quiver as the wealth of a noble, ... Farming and cattle breeding as the wealth of a merchant, ... The sickle and carrying pole as the wealth of a worker, ... What does Master Gotama say about this? Well, Brahman, has all the world authorized the Brahmins to prescribe these 4 types of wealth? No, Master Gotama. Suppose, Brahman, they were to force a cut of meat upon a poor, penniless, destitute man and tell him, "Good man, you must eat this meat and pay for it." So too, without the consent of those other recluses and Brahmins, the Brahmins nevertheless prescribe these 4 types of wealth. I, Brahman, declare the noble supermundane Dhamma as a person's own wealth, ... What do you think, Brahman? Suppose a head-anointed noble king were to assemble here 100 men of different birth and say to them, "Come, sirs, let any here who have been born into a noble clan, or a Brahmin clan, or a royal clan, take a fire stick of teak, salwood, pine, sandalwood, or pomegranate wood, and light a fire and produce heat. And also let any who have been born into an outcast clan, a trapper clan, a wicker workers clan, a cartwright's clan, or a scavenger's clan, take a fire stick made from a dog's drinking trough, from a pig's trough, from a dyeing vat, or from castor oil wood, and light a fire and produce heat. What do you think, Brahman? When a fire is lit and heat is produced by someone in the first group, would that fire have a flame, a color, and a radiance? And would it be possible to use it for the purposes of fire? While when a fire is lit and heat is produced by someone of the second group, that fire would have no flame, no color, and no radiance, and it would not be possible to use it for the purposes of fire? No, Master Gotama, for all fire has a flame, a color, and a radiance, and it is possible to use all fire for the purposes of fire. So too, Brahman, if anyone from a clan of nobles goes forth from the home life into homelessness and relying on the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, ... holds right view, he is one who fulfills the wholesome qualities that are the way of deliverance. If anyone from a clan of Brahmins goes forth, ... from a clan of merchants, ... from a clan of workers, goes forth from the home life into homelessness and relying on the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, ... holds right view, he is one who fulfills the wholesome qualities that are the way of deliverance. This is from the Sukari Sutta, MII 180-84. C. Nibbāna is the highest spiritual attainment. Although the attainment of Nibbāna is dependent on mental deliverance, Ceto Vimutti, that is, it relies on a particular achievement of jhana, and this achievement has a bearing on the everyday life of enlightened beings. Nibbāna is distinct from jhana. Nibbāna is a release even from these psychic advancements and is accessible when one is able to transcend them. There are some unique aspects to the attainment of Nibbāna. The realization of Nibbāna is decisive, final, and irreversible. In regards to moral conduct, for example, true spontaneous selflessness arises. This selfless conduct stems from eradication by wisdom of selfish hankering, to the point that all self-obsession is abolished. As this selflessness arises naturally and of its own accord, it is not the result of willpower or force. One need not seize one opinion or habit in order to let go of another. One need not hold up some ideal, sacrifice oneself to an object of faith, suppress one's passion by calmer insight, or get absorbed in jhana. No matter how lofty a person's mental achievements, one must see into their causal nature and let go of attachment to these achievements before realization of Nibbāna is possible. This letting go ultimately supports, consolidates, and perfects further spiritual development, even for enlightened beings. For example, such beings can benefit from proficiency in jhana in order to abide in a state of ease and happiness when they are not engaged in other activities. If originally they accessed the 8 levels of jhana with the realization as a non-returner or arhat, they may achieve cessation of perception and feeling. Some spiritual accomplishments can suspend defilements and suffering for a long period, but not yet irrevocably. The defilements and suffering can return, and therefore these heightened mental states are temporary. They are a means to suppress other conditions or to engage the mind in something else. The realization of Nibbāna, however, puts an absolute end to suffering and mental impurities. And through this realization, only harmful conditions cease. For example, greed, craving, anger, woe, confusion, fixed views of self, and ignorance, all goodness remains. Furthermore, the vices are automatically replaced by the exceptional wholesome qualities of a life guided by wisdom and compassion, which surpass ordinary happiness and cannot be securely accessed by other spiritual achievements. Therefore, although a person who has realized Nibbāna may not have experienced the most refined states of jhana, he or she is still superior to someone who has these experiences, but is as yet not fully enlightened. The realization of Nibbāna brings about a fundamental transformation of a person's heart, personality, thinking process, worldview, and behavior. There are 2 principal aspects to this mental transformation. The first involves knowledge, understanding, opinions, and beliefs, which pertain to ignorance and wisdom. The second involves a person's sense of values or relationship to desire, which pertains to craving and wholesome enthusiasm, chanda. A student who believes her teacher will criticize and punish her may tremble at the thought of meeting the teacher, whereas if she knows that the teacher is kind, she will feel happy and at ease. People who see others as enemies and those who see others as friends will behave differently. A person finding a map that shows the location of a hidden diamond may risk his life and even kill others for that treasure, while another person may not give it much thought. People desiring pleasurable sights, tastes, fragrances, sounds, and tangible objects tend to be engrossed with these things. If they believe that they can truly possess these objects, then their happiness is dependent on their acquisition. In contrast, fully enlightened beings understand the world as it really is. They see nothing that can be truly owned or controlled. They go beyond the search for pleasurable sensations, and they recognize how to act in harmony with truth. They do not yearn for sense impressions. As a consequence, a new understanding arises of one's relationship to the world, including material possessions, other people, nature, and even one's own life. One is of the world, but not bound to it or tarnished by it. This liberation and inner transformation is difficult to describe, and therefore the scriptures explain it with similes. For example, recovering from an illness, sobering up, cooling down, clearing out refuse, escaping from a snare or chain, and crossing over an expanse of water to a safe haven. Many of these similes depict the happiness of relieving an original entanglement, inconvenience, confinement, and struggle. The release from these constraints to a state of freedom and safety is Nibbāna. Enlightened persons can move about as they please without worrying about self-protection. Some of the above similes can be used for other spiritual achievements. The difference lies in the fact that jhana, for instance, provides only temporary results. In every time period, at least a small percentage of human beings will seek the meaning and ultimate goal of life, beyond merely being born, searching for sense pleasure, and dying. Sometimes material difficulties or a struggle for survival will cause them to temporarily neglect or interrupt their search, But when circumstances permit, as long as doubt persists, people will concern themselves with these matters. Therefore, any creed or philosophy that merely answers to material comfort and does not meet people's spiritual needs is incomplete and unable to offer adequate satisfaction. To use Buddhist terminology, responding to mundane welfare alone is insufficient. One must also attend to spiritual welfare and supreme welfare. The teachings on Nibbāna and other spiritual achievements fulfill this requirement. Some psychic attainments, however, although surpassing mundane phenomena, are still classified as subordinate. That is, one is encouraged to reach the final stage of Nibbāna, the supreme benefit and true perfection. 6.8 Common misunderstandings about Nibbāna. A. Attaching to non-attachment. The origin of suffering can be identified with its two primary agents, ignorance, avijja, and craving, tanha. Likewise, the cessation of suffering can be identified with two essential qualities, knowledge, vijja, and deliverance, vimutti. The former process may be described as ignorance leading to attachment, and the latter as deliverance through knowledge. In the former process, the link which leads to birth and becoming is upadana, translated as grasping, clinging, or attachment. In the later process, the link which leads out of the round of rebirth, samsara is nibbida, translated as disenchantment or dispassion, the end of craving and attachment. As a pair, upadana and nibbida are polar opposites. Upadana stems indirectly from not knowing the true nature of things. This not knowing opens the door to craving, the wish to possess and consume things. Craving leads to getting tied up and investing in things, being a certain way, which is upadana. In contrast, nibbida springs from a thorough understanding of those things formerly attached to. One understands their faults and dangers, and one sees the harm of getting obsessed with them. This gives rise to disenchantment. One is no longer fascinated by these things and is willing to relinquish them. Disenchantment arises from knowing the true nature of things. This knowledge is called yatha bhuta jnanadasana. It is important to note that both the arising in disenchantment and the eradication of clinging are due to knowledge. With the true understanding of things, nibbida arises and upadana ceases automatically. It is a natural causal process or a state that arises following causes and conditions. One sometimes hears the injunction, don't be attached, let go, or all that is necessary is non-clinging. This teaching is laudable, but one should bear in mind that non-attachment needs to arise correctly in line with a natural process. If it is not, one's practice may be incorrect and even harmful. The risk is that one attaches to non-attachment, which can have the same detrimental effects as clinging to anything else. Imagine that a beautifully wrapped bundle has been placed within a locked glass case. A man sees the bundle and is convinced that it contains something valuable. He is fixated on obtaining that object, but is unable to get at it. Later, someone whom he respects tells him that there is nothing of value in that bundle, and that coveting it is harmful. One part of the man wants to believe this advice and realizes the damaging effects of his actions, but on a deeper level, he is still convinced the bundle contains a treasure. He is unable to sever his longing through willpower, although he tries to prove to others that he has let go. His outward behavior displays a disinterest for the bundle, but even if he were to loudly broadcast this, his heart is still bound. Moreover, in his attempt to show others he does not care, he may behave oddly and inappropriately. Later, the contents of the bundle are revealed to the man, and he sees that they are indeed worthless. Knowing this clearly for himself, the hankering then ceases immediately. Even if he were to try and convince himself to desire the object, he would remain disinterested. His mind is prepared to engage fully with other things. The behavior above can be compared to that of unawakened persons whose desires and attachments are influenced by craving. They may have been told that their desired objects are essentially undesirable and that their attachment is potentially harmful. They may agree, though, through reasoning, that the desire and attachment is harmful and want to believe that the longed-for objects are of no value, but they do not yet truly see it this way. Deep down, the desire and attachment remains. They may seemingly be disinterested in those pleasurable things, but this disinterest or non-attachment is not genuine and is a form of posturing. They are simply conforming behavior to an idea of non-attachment. Their non-attachment is a form of attachment, and their actions are dictated by this attachment. This can result in disingenuous or eccentric behavior. In contrast, when one understands the true nature of conditioned phenomena, that specific conditions bring about inevitable results, the heart is delivered and grasping ceases of its own accord. One's behavior is then natural and uncontrived. Returning to the former example of the man who desires the bundle, his friends may explain the entire sequence of how the bundle and its worthless contents were prepared. Following this reasoning, the man may be convinced that the contents are indeed valueless. This firm conviction may have a strong bearing on his thoughts and actions. Although he is not yet completely free of desire, only a mild longing remains, quite different from his initial passion. This is similar to the knowledge and the state of mind of persons who have achieved the first three stages of enlightenment, from stream enterers to non-returners, those ranked between ordinary people and arhats. Examples from everyday life that reveal a person's true level of non-attachment are the emotions of worry and fear. Some people feel nervous, seemingly for no reason. Even scolding themselves for feeling does not help. A person may be in a safe place with no cause for fear, but as soon as he hears the cry of a wild animal or a siren, he involuntarily gets frightened. Rational thought alone cannot uproot these emotions. One must get to the heart of the matter. Ordinary people without deep insight may ask if they should practice non-attachment. Because the recognition of dangers of attachment is beneficial, they are advised to practice this way. They should bear in mind, however, that they still abide at one level of attachment, and that it is detrimental to believe prematurely that they have attained true non-attachment. By acting judiciously and wisely, the harmful consequences of excessive and deceptive behavior are avoided. This virtuous conduct and self-discipline creates a foundation for genuine non-attachment in the future. Although attaching to non-attachment is usually well-intended, there are those with ill intent who may argue that since all things are insubstantial and people are made up of component parts, no one exists in any real sense. Therefore, it is acceptable to harm others. This is simply an extreme form of attachment. They are selecting an aspect of truth to justify their own desires. If they were not in some way obsessed with the victim and had no evil intent, why would they wish to cause the person harm? B. Overestimation. Most people are preoccupied by material concerns. When they experience subtle, unfamiliar spiritual events, they are easily impressed. But because they lack a fundamental understanding of the workings of the mind, they are unable to distinguish between the different experiences and get confused. Even skilled practitioners can have this problem. An analytical or reflective ability goes a long way to prevent misunderstanding and misguided effort. People who are fascinated with miracles and the supernatural tend to praise those with psychic powers and believe they have reached the highest spiritual goal. Likewise, someone who is keen on solitude, develops the mind, and has tasted the joy of seclusion will often instill faith in others, even if he or she has not yet reached any exceptional states of mind. People who have attained the fruits of serenity practice, samatha, the jhanas, will appear even more impressive. They themselves may mistake serenity for insight, or they may overestimate their achievements and believe to be enlightened. They may attain the joy of insight, vipassana sukha, which is technically classified as an impurity, upakalesa, and mistake this for Nibbāna. They may get carried away by the praise lavished by others. This is not to say that one should be suspicious or find fault, since it is suitable to respect those who are worthy, but one should know clearly what other people have to offer. This way, the rewards of Dhamma practice for both practitioners and their admirers will not lead to ill effects, and they will avoid getting stuck in extreme asceticism or another form of wrong practice. C. Happiness and readiness for happiness. Happiness is an essential ingredient for Dhamma practice. Buddhism encouraged people to experience the different levels of happiness, in particular the refined happiness independent of material things, which provides a great benefit to practice. Delight in sensual pleasures needs no encouraging, as people are preoccupied enough with this already. Buddhism does not promote attachment to any kind of happiness and is more interested in cultivating a readiness in people to experience happiness than in the various states of happiness themselves. When this state of readiness is developed, a person can choose at will from those levels of happiness already established. This readiness is itself an inherent form of happiness, which surpasses all other happiness. For realized persons who have developed this readiness, no source of suffering remains, permitting them to experience all forms of happiness without causing harm to themselves or others. This inherent happiness is one vital feature of Nibbāna. 6.9 Points of Controversy. A. Nibbāna and the Self. Let us look once more at the questions about self, atta. In the final analysis, does Buddhism acknowledge the existence of a self? Does the Buddha's rejection of the five aggregates as self indicate that he wished us to discover a true self beyond the body-mind? And is Nibbāna the ultimate self? There are several points here to bear in mind. All beliefs about the self or soul spring from bhavatanha, the desire for eternal life. This desire incites one to seize something as stable and lasting, leading to suppositions, beliefs, and theories on self. Initially, one takes the body as self, but as soon as it is clear that the body cannot satisfy one's desire, one searches for something else. When even the mind cannot fulfill one's desire, one goes further, grasping, for instance, to exalted states encountered in jhana as the true self. Some define atta in a broader sense than the ego, as the source of all things or an immortal spirit. But no matter how refined these concepts of self, they are essentially the same, in that they satisfy the craving for eternal life. The error here does not lie with the objects identified with or grasped onto as self. These phenomena exist according to their own nature. In the case that they are conditioned phenomena, Sankhata Dhamma, for example, they proceed according to specific causes and conditions. They require no self, no core, no essence to interfere with, overlap, or control their natural process. Any such fixed self would create chaos and conflict with the insubstantial nature of things. The belief in such a fixed self is thus misguided and erroneous. It is the creation of an image or idea of something that does not, in fact, truly exist. How do people fall into this error? Its root cause is the craving for being, bhavatanha, alternatively, craving for becoming, which gives rise to grasping, upadana. When people identify with things by way of grasping, regardless of whether that object is real or purely imaginary, they create a distorted perception of that thing. This distorted perception then becomes an image of self, which is cherished and falsely believed to be real. Ideas for self depend on the relationship between craving and the object taken to be self. The self is associated with such an object, but it does not exist separate from the craving for being, the source of these beliefs. Self-perceptions, atta, sana, self-views, atta titi, and the grasping that leads to repeated assertions of self, atta, vadu, padana, are accumulated so habitually that they become deeply lodged in the mind. When these views are contracted, contradicted, when these views are contradicted, people tend to look for a loophole and search for something else to call self. The search for a replacement is proof of the urgency in maintaining a self. When the original perception of self is threatened or ruled out, the person fears annihilation and reaches for a new concept of self. The basic craving for existence and self-views are still fully intact, and nothing essentially changes by attaching to a new object. The idea of self is merely expressed in a more elaborate and detailed way. One may grasp onto an aspect of truth in this way, but it will result in a misinterpretation of that truth. Grasping at Nibbāna as self results in a distorted image of Nibbāna that is masked by desire, indicating that one has not yet realized true Nibbāna. See note 6.5, and we'll go to that. Nibbāna is not, note 6.5, Nibbāna is not a self. This is a very important distinction between Buddhism and religions that avow a soul or eternal God. The absolute truth, as presented by some religions and branches of theology, can appear almost identical to that of Buddhism. The difference is that these faiths define the highest reality in terms of a self or supreme being. Although adherents of these faiths may reach profound states of consciousness, they are still caught up in the latent yet insistent need for a self. When discussing one of these profound states, they look for an angle or reference to label it as self in the hope that they will continue to exist in some enduring, constant way, which indicates that they still harbor bhavatanha. In Buddhism, this mechanism is called the master ensnaring net, Brahma Jala, the net that traps Brahma. See the Brahma Jala Sutta, DI 12-46. More important than any concept of self is the desire for self, which breeds all pursuits for and debates over self. Back to the regular text, main text. Any viable solution to this problem is prevented by the inability to abandon craving. One may acknowledge that one's self-view is false, but deep down this idea still conflicts with craving, and the acceptance of it is therefore not complete. When one belief is invalidated, the tendency is to search for another belief to take its place. One may also swing to the opposite extreme, the theory of nihilism. Solving this dilemma is not a matter of identifying the true self, but rather correcting the very belief in self and addressing the root of the problem, the craving which creates ever more elaborate ideas of self. One must uproot self-view, attaditti, or anatta-nuditi, reject the belief in an enduring self or soul, attavada, and abandon the craving for existence, bhavatanha. When this craving and grasping are abandoned, the self or the ideas of self in which one invests so much importance are also relinquished. With this relinquishment, the question of self is concluded. One need not affix a concept of self onto something else. The self ceases automatically with the destruction of this native craving. Nothing more needs to be said about the self. The self becomes meaningless. And there's a footnote here, 88, on craving, on the apparent contradiction between intentional action, comma, and non-self, anatta. See chapter 5 on comma, especially the Buddhist statements quoted. Back to the main text. The extreme and controversial interpretation that Buddhism rejects the 5 aggregates of self, yet claims that Nibbāna is the true self, is an error resulting from misdirected focus. Proponents of this view pay too much attention to what the Buddha rejected as self, rather than how he rejected the self and how he rejected the attachment that gives rise to the self. The reason the Buddha chose the 5 aggregates as the focus in the 3 characteristics, asserting that they are insubstantial and not truly controllable, is because the aggregates are all that ordinary people are able to know and conceive of. And the footnote there is, see 12 sense spheres, ayatana, are also frequent topics of analysis in this context. They comprise of all things that are generally held to be self, including experiences in jhana. The Buddha's rejection of the aggregates as self was not an encouragement to find something else to grasp onto. The aim of his teaching is precisely to eradicate self-view, self-attachment, and craving for existence, not merely to know the insubstantiality of the aggregates. If the Buddha wanted us to reject the aggregates of self in order to adopt something else as the true self, he would have made it amply clear what that is. He would not have left us guessing and disputing. Non-self, as part of the three characteristics, is usually referred to in the scriptures in the phrase, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all conditioned phenomena are dukkha, and all things are non-self, anatta. This passage by the Buddha shows that anatta has a range of meaning broader than anicca and dukkha. The first two clauses state that all conditioned phenomena, sankhara or sankhara dhamma, are impermanent and subject to stress, whereas the third clause states that all dhammas, all things, both conditioned phenomena and the unconditioned, sankhata dhamma and asankhata dhamma, or sankhara and visankhara, are non-self. In the following passage in the Parivara of the Vinaya Pitaka clearly reiterates that Nibbāna is included in the clause, all things are non-self. All formations are impermanent, dukkha, and non-self. Nibbāna and designations are non-self. Although evidence shows that the Parivara is a later text in the Tipitaka, one must concede that this is a consensus from early pre-commentarial Buddhism. In any case, although such a text material exists, one ought to define anatta with caution. Even the Buddha showed caution when discussing atta anatta. His approach can be summarized as follows. Firstly, when the listener had an adequate basis of understanding, the Buddha would explain the nature of the object held to be self and the grasping that needs to be abandoned, as can be seen in his references to the 5 aggregates and the 12 sense bases in the teachings of the 3 characteristics. Secondly, if someone asked him the isolated metaphysical question whether the self exists or does not exist, the Buddha remained silent and would not answer. From SIV 400. At one time, the wanderer Vacchagotta approached the Buddha and asked, "Is there a self?" The Buddha was silent. Vacchagotta resumed, "Then is there no self?" The Buddha remained silent. Vacchagotta then rose from his seat and departed. Later, Venerable Nanda said to the Buddha, "Why is it that when the Blessed One was questioned by the wanderer, he did not answer?" The Buddha replied, "If I had answered there is a self, this would have been siding with those who are eternalist. If I had answered there is no self, this would have been siding with those who are annihilationist." Again, that's SIV 400. In the first manner of teaching about non-self stated above, the Buddha points out how the things a person identifies with as self cannot be held in any real way. When a person recognizes this misapprehension, the dangers of grasping and the advantage of letting go become apparent. One understands the meaning of freedom and knows how to conduct oneself appropriately in the world, living in purpose rather than drifting aimlessly and allowing craving to develop into a more serious mental complex. By gaining understanding, a practitioner removes self-views and reduces craving for existence. At the same time, questions about self gradually dissolve. This way of explaining differs greatly from trying to answer metaphysical questions about the self, which spring from people's craving for existence, bhavatanha, or craving for extinction, vibhavatanha. The craving is tied up with fixed views, either a variant of eternalism, sattva ditti, or annihilationism, ucheda ditti. Answering or repudiating these kinds of questions to someone with fixed beliefs is risky and leads to confusion. No matter how one answers, the person will base his conceptions upon established beliefs. If the answer is consistent with his views, he will take this as a confirmation of his specific understanding. If inconsistent, he will conclude the opposite. For example, if one answers that the self exists, the view of a listener biased towards eternalism will be reinforced. If one negates the self, he will go to the opposite extreme and interpret this as a form of annihilationism. He may then develop the misguided idea that since no self exists, persecution of others has no consequence. Since no one acts, no one receives the fruits of actions. And therefore, why should one perform good deeds? People form conclusions according to their cravings and fixed opinions. These biased conclusions inevitably result in the extreme views of eternalism or annihilationism, neither of which is espoused by Buddhism. Moreover, some people may develop a phobia of extinction. Some may conclude that Nibbāna equals extinction and give up practicing the Dhamma out of fear. Such reactions and views are extremely unfortunate. When someone asks whether things exist or do not exist, if one is not careful, both answers they exist and they do not exist may potentially cause problems, because such answers may maintain the view of eternalism and annihilationism. One should not answer categorically. Instead, one should explain that those things people refer to as existing come into being as a result of causes and conditions. They are conditioned phenomena, sankhara, sankhata dhamma. They exist temporarily or momentarily, continually arising and passing away. They arise mutually dependent on one another, paticca samuppada, in the form of a stream or conditioned process. The Buddha therefore did not answer with a simple affirmative or negative. He referred to the process of origination. This form of response aims to dispel our misconception of things. The teachings on anatta function to remove self-concepts fabricated by craving and wrong view. With the release of attachment, the self or self-concepts cease automatically. If one comprehends anatta as the common, i.e. unawakened belief of no self, however, then one falls into the wrong view of annihilationism. In the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha often characterized enlightened beings as having neither atta nor niratta, having neither a self nor an absence of self. They have no thirst for being, bhavatanha, which hankers after a self, nor do they hold a view of existence, bhavaditti, which leads to a view of self, attaditti, or a view of self-extinction, uccedaditti. Another definition is that they believe neither in an existing self nor an expired self. They avoid the misinterpretation of a fixed self-identity, followed by the belief that the self has vanished. In conclusion, although the Buddha declared the truth must always be linked to practical application. He wished that those who receive his teaching apply and benefit from them. The way of explaining anatta by examining the objects a person identifies with and by examining people's relationship to craving intends to free the listener from harmful views and attachments, enabling them to have a liberated heart and to prosper. Metaphysical responses, when indulged in, add to confusion and deepen wrong view. The Buddha therefore remained silent when asked such metaphysical questions. Now, let us turn to the specific question of whether Nibbāna constitutes a form of self, atta, or whether Nibbāna is endowed with some form of substantial essence that could be described as self. First, all existing phenomena which can be defined by terms dhamma, thing, sabhava, existing phenomena, or sabhava dhamma, natural phenomena, exist according to their own inherent nature. In respect to conditioned things, sankhara, sankhata dhamma, they exist in line with their causes and conditions. Nibbāna, on the other hand, is the unconditioned visankhara, Sankhata-dhamma. It also exists according to its own nature and is endowed with its own inherent attributes, say of purity and independence, as confirmed many times by the Buddha. As Nibbāna exists according to its own nature, it is impossible for a self to interfere with, rule over, control, or dictate it. If a self, some form of static ruling essence, were to exist, Nibbāna would not be able to exist as it does. Second, some people who discuss these questions about Nibbāna and its relationship to the self do not understand these terms adequately. They lack a scholarly clarity within themselves and cause confusion for others. Until we ourselves are awakened, we can rely on the words of the Buddha used to describe and explain Nibbāna. As for the term atta, self, one should define it in the context of the traditional philosophical questions posed by others to the Buddha, rather than create one's own definitions or rely on ambiguous contemporary definitions of the term. Some people misunderstand this topic of the self versus selflessness, anatta, and begin to wonder, for example, whether they themselves exist or not. Ultimately, the concept of self, atta, should be understood as the belief in me, in the I, in him and her, etc., as distinct fixed entities. In the Pali language, however, the term atta is also used to refer to the conventional sense of self, as is clearly evident in the Buddha's teaching. One is one's own refuge, atta hai, attano natto. Literally, the self is the refuge of the self. Although the teachings state that in truth there is no abiding fixed essence or substantial entity, the conventional designation of a self is valid and useful. In the discussion of Nibbāna, however, one is examining the true nature of phenomena and asking the questions, does Nibbāna constitute a self? Is Nibbāna my true self? Is the realization of Nibbāna the attainment of one's true self? Were Nibbāna to be one's true self, it would have the power to control and dictate things according to one's desires. And the only things it would be able to direct and control are conditioned phenomena or the five aggregates. Nibbāna would thus pass over the threshold of the unconditioned and get caught up in conditioned phenomena. Were this to be true, Nibbāna would utterly lose its status as the unconditioned. It would no longer correspond with Nibbāna as described by the Buddha. It would no longer be Nibbāna, at least not in the Nibbāna of the Buddha. Third, the claim that Nibbāna is the self is necessarily connected to grasping and clinging. For Nibbāna to be self, there must be upadana. There must be grasping, upadana. Yet this is in conflict with reality, because the realization of Nibbāna only occurs with the end of grasping, upadana. The end of grasping constitutes the realization of Nibbāna. The arhats who have realized Nibbāna harbor no conception of my Nibbāna, let alone Nibbāna is the self. The belief in Nibbāna as the self is completely incompatible with Nibbāna. Fourth, if Nibbāna were to exist as a separate supreme self, it would act as the master and principal agent, controlling and dictating all things. In this sense, it would be similar to Paramatman, supreme self, primordial self, Brahma or God, who in theistic religions is claimed to have created the world, rules over all human beings, and is Lord of the universe. Yet Nibbāna is a state of purity, happiness, and independence. It is unconditioned, visankhara. It does not engage in any way with conditioned things, Sankhata-dhamma. It pertains to a completely different matter, to a completely different reality, which one may describe as diametrically opposed to the conditioned world. It is thus impossible for Nibbāna to exist as a self. Fifth, the Buddhist teachings clearly state that the belief in or attachment to self is a form of mental defilement, kilesa. a form of grasping, upadana, clinging, incorrect adherence. In this context, the specific term attavadupadana is used, translated as grasping to the belief in self. The craving for the self to endure and exist eternally, bhavatanha, is the cause for this form of grasping. If this craving manifests by itself, one has not yet reached the full-blown problem. But if one steps beyond craving, one arrives at grasping, upadana, which lies at the crux of the matter being discussed here. Note that the specific term for this grasping does not merely refer to a grasping of the self, atta, but also includes the term vada. Here, there is not grasping to the self, but rather grasping to the belief in self. In fact, no self as a permanent stable entity exists. For this reason, strictly speaking, it is impossible to grasp onto a self, for essentially no such self exists. The term vata, belief, idea, doctrine, assertion, is added here for the sake of clarity. Any attachment to the belief in self, including attachment to language indicating a mistaken identification with self, is a form of mental impurity. Note that in some scriptural passages, this grasping is described in a non-specific general sense. For example, in the statement, abandon the self. Here, it should be understood that what is meant is abandon any attachment to the belief in self. The grasping to a belief in self, attavadupadana, is a crucial mental defilement. Listed among the 4 kinds of grasping, upadana, completely relinquished by full awakened beings, arhats. Those who are free from any attachment to the belief in self, who do not identify with anything as a self, are by definition arhats. Those who realize Nibbāna, the fully awakened arhats, do not appropriate anything as self. Even in regards to Nibbāna itself, they do not consider it to be a self. Those who still grasp onto a belief in self, or who still recognize something to exist as self, are still tainted by defilement. They lack true vision. They have not yet realized Nibbāna, the unconditioned. No matter what these people believe to be self, even if it is Nibbāna, because they have not directly realized Nibbāna, their knowledge and vision is still confined to the conditioned world. Therefore, whatever concept of self they create, even if they identify Nibbāna with the self, is still bound to and comprised of conditioned phenomena. They still spin around in the realm of the 5 aggregates. If they claim that Nibbāna is the self, they are grasping onto a mental image or concept of Nibbāna, and such concepts or mental formations, sankhara, which are part of the 5 aggregates. To sum up with the Buddha's words, I do not see any doctrine of self that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who clings to it. M.I. 137. B. What happens after an arhat's death? An inevitable question that arises in the discussion of Nibbāna is, what happens to an arhat after death? Or, does a person who has realized Nibbāna exist after death or not? In truth, this question is centered around self-view. The devotion to self is acting as a catalyst in posing the question. The attachment to self, or the label of self, attavadupadana, a doctrine of self, is firmly embedded in the hearts of unenlightened people, supported by the thirst for being, bhavatanha, and based on ignorance of ija. The Buddha did not encourage debating this question if one has not eliminated ignorance and craving. He encouraged knowledge through application rather than conjecture. No matter how one responds to these inquiries, the latent root attachment to self will inevitably lead to a biased understanding. The questioner will incline towards a wrong view of Nibbāna as either an enduring self or an eradication of self. It is easy for annihilationists to view Nibbāna as extinction because Buddhism emphasizes disentangling from the widespread belief in eternalism. As for internalists, when their idea of self is invalidated, they search for a substitute to compensate for the sense of void or to restore the idea of a stable self. When they encounter a teaching that advocates uprooting the fixed belief in self, it can seem to them that the self vanishes. They may then seize Nibbāna as a haven for the self, or equate Nibbāna as eternal life or the promised land. Many esteemed and wise individuals who are free from almost all forms of attachment get caught up in these views. The escape from this net leads to complete liberation. The Buddhist teachings admit that such freedom is extremely difficult to achieve and refers to this subtle attachment to views as the Brahma ensnaring web, Brahmajala, or an entanglement for the virtuous and wise. As mentioned in the chapter on the three characteristics, an arhat may be referred to as one who has abandoned the self, atanjaha. This expression is used for the sake of convenience, say in poetic verses, yet it would have been expected that the listener understood this in the sense of abandoning an attachment to the concepts of self. This is also the case with such expressions as boost the ego, self-preservation, or similar references to self which are used for the sake of simplicity. The term self here should be understood as self-image or an attachment to the concept of self. Nibbāna and the practice for Nibbāna have nothing to do with destroying the self because there is no self to destroy. It is the attachments to concepts of self that must be destroyed. One must remove the attachment to self-assertions, self-views, and self-perceptions. Nibbāna is the end of these misunderstandings and the end of the suffering caused by attachment. When the yearning for self ceases, all theories of self automatically lose their significance. When the attachment to self is uprooted, things will be seen as they truly are. There is no need for further speculation about self. When the craving and grasping which gives rise to self ceases, the matter of self vanishes of its own accord. Nibbāna is the cessation of suffering, not the cessation of self, since there is no self that ceases. Reflect on the Buddha's words, I teach only suffering and the end of suffering. In order to shift the emphasis from the preoccupation with Nibbāna and philosophical debate, the Buddha usually referred to Nibbāna in the context of practical application or to the related benefits for everyday life, as demonstrated in the passages of the Tipitaka. Rather than give lengthy explanations on the subject of what happens to arhats after they die, some teachings of the Buddha are included below for consideration. This teaching offers a basic understanding of the subject of self, presenting the two extreme views of eternalism and extinction. It also elucidates the meaning of bhavatanha and vibhavatanha. Bhikkhus, both devas and humans, are subject to the hold of two views. Some are bogged down, some overreach, while those with vision see, and how monks are some bogged down. Devas and humans delight in becoming, bhava, rejoice in becoming, taking pleasure in becoming. When the Dhamma is being taught for the cessation of becoming, bhava nirodha, the hearts of those devas and humans do not leap forward, do not gain confidence, do not become settled, do not yield. Thus are some bogged down. And how monks do some overreach? Some devas and humans are afflicted, depressed, and disgusted by becoming. They delight in non-becoming, vibhava, extinction, saying, my good sir, with the breaking up of the body at death, this self is annihilated, destroyed, and no longer exists. This state is supreme, excellent, and true. Thus do some overreach. And how monks do those with vision see? In this case, a monk sees becoming as becoming. When he sees becoming as becoming, he practices for disenchantment, nibbāna, dispassion, viraga, and cessation, nirodha, in regards to becoming. Thus do those with vision see. Whoever sees becoming as becoming and sees the state beyond becoming surrenders to the truth through the exhaustion of lust for existence. With full understanding of becoming, one is free from craving for both existence and extinction, abhava. With the end of what has come to be, a monk comes not further to birth. IT 43-4, PS 1:159. The Buddha's repudiation of the view that consciousness leaves the body and takes a new birth is of particular interest in the study of rebirth. Although the subject of rebirth is not directly linked to Nibbāna, examining the teachings on rebirth may add to an understanding of Nibbāna. On that occasion, a wrong view had arisen in a bhikkhu named Sati, son of a fisherman, thus: as I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the rounds of rebirths, not another, ... The bhikkhus were unable to detach him from that pernicious view, so they went to the Buddha and told him all that had occurred, ... The Buddha then called the bhikkhu Sati and asked him, Sati, is it true that the following pernicious view has arisen in you? As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, it is the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the rounds of rebirths, not another. Exactly so, Venerable Sir. What is that consciousness, Sati? Venerable Sir, it is that which speaks and feels and experiences here and there the result of good and bad actions. Misguided man, to whom have you ever known me to teach the Dhamma in that way? In many discourses have I not stated consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness. But you, misguided man, have misrepresented us by your wrong grasp, and injured yourself and stored up much demerit, for this will lead to your harm and suffering for a long time. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, consciousness is reckoned by the particular condition dependent upon which arises. When consciousness arises dependent on the eye and forms, it is reckoned as eye consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the ear and sound, it is reckoned as ear consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on nose and odors, it is reckoned as nose consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on tongue and flavors, it is reckoned as tongue consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on body intangibles, it is reckoned as body consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on mind and mind objects, it is reckoned as mind consciousness. Just as fire is reckoned by the particular condition upon which it burns, ... it is reckoned as a log fire, a wood chip fire, a grass fire, a cow dung fire, a chaff fire, a rubbish fire. This is from the Mahatangha Sanghaya Sutta, MI 256-60. This teaching corrects the misguided view that arhats are annihilated after death. On one occasion, the following wrong view had arisen in a bhikkhu named Yamaka. As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed is annihilated and perishes with the breakup of the body and does not exist after death. A number of bhikkhus unsuccessfully tried to rid him of this wrong view. They therefore asked Venerable Sariputta for assistance. Sariputta approached Yamaka and conducted the following conversation. Is it true, friend Yamaka, that such a pernicious view as this has arisen in you? As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed is annihilated and perishes with the breakup of the body and does not exist after death. Exactly so, friend. What do you think, friend Yamaka? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, friend. Is feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, friend. Therefore, any kind of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, whatsoever, whether past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Seeing thus, one's mind is liberated. What do you think, friend Yamaka? Do you regard form as the Tathagata? No, friend. Do you regard feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness as the Tathagata? No, friend. What do you think, friend Yamaka? Do you regard the Tathagata as in form? No, friend. Do you regard the Tathagata as apart from form? No, friend. Do you regard the Tathagata as in feeling, apart from feeling, as in perception, apart from perception, as in volitional formations, as apart from volitional formations, as in consciousness, as apart from consciousness? No, friend. And I'm skipping the dots there. What do you think, friend Yamaka? Do you regard form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness taken together as the Tathagata? No, friend. What do you think, friend Yamaka? Do you regard the Tathagata as one who is without form, without feeling, without perception, without volitional formations, without consciousness? No, friend. But friend, when the Tathagata is not apprehended by you as real and actual here in this very life, is it fitting for you to declare, as I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed is annihilated and perishes with the breakup of the body and does not exist after death? Formerly, friend Sariputta, when I was ignorant, I did hold that pernicious view, but now that I have heard this Dhamma teaching of the Venerable Sariputta, I have abandoned that pernicious view and have made the breakthrough to the Dhamma. If, friend Yamaka, people were to ask you, friend Yamaka, when a bhikkhu is an arhat whose taints are destroyed, what happens to him with the breakup of the body after death? Being asked thus, what would you answer? If they were to ask me this, friend, I would answer thus: friends, form is impermanent. What is impermanent is dukkha. What is dukkha has ceased and passed away. Feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness is impermanent. What is impermanent is dukkha. What is dukkha has ceased and passed away. Being thus asked, friend, I would answer in such a way. Good, friend Yamaka. SIII 109 to 112. In this teaching, the Buddha, while conversing with the wanderer Vacchagotta, compares the death of an arhat with the extinguishing of a fire. When a bhikkhu's mind is liberated thus, Master Gotama, where does he reappear after death? The term reappear does not apply, Vaccha. Then he does not reappear, Master Gotama? The term does not reappear does not apply, Vaccha. Then he both reappears and does not reappear, Master Gotama? The term both reappears and does not reappear does not apply, Vaccha. Then he neither reappears nor does not reappear, Master Gotama. The term neither reappears nor does not reappear does not apply, Vaccha. Here I have fallen into bewilderment, Master Gotama. Here I have fallen into confusion, and the measure of confidence I have gained through previous conversations with Master Gotama has now disappeared. It is enough to cause you bewilderment, Vaccha, enough to cause you confusion. For this Dhamma, Vaccha, is profound, hard to see, and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. It is hard for you to understand it when you hold another view, accept another teaching, approve of another teaching, pursue a different training, and follow a different teacher. So I shall question you about this in return, Vaccha. Answer as you choose. What do you think, Vaccha? Suppose a fire were burning before you. Would you know, this fire is burning before me? I would, Master Gotama. If someone were to ask you, Vaccha, what does this fire burning before you burn independence on? Being asked thus, what would you answer? Being asked thus, Master Gotama, I would answer, this fire burning before me burns independence on grass and sticks. If that fire before you were to be extinguished, would you know, this fire before me has been extinguished? I would, Master Gotama. If someone were to ask you, Vaccha, when that fire before you was extinguished, to which direction did it go? To the east, to the west, the north, or to the south? Being asked thus, what would you answer? That does not apply, Master Gotama. The fire burned in dependence on its fuel of grass and sticks. When that is used up, it does not get any more fuel. Being without fuel, it is reckoned as extinguished. So too, Vacha, the Tathagata has abandoned that material form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, by which one describing the Tathagata might describe him. He has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, done away with it, so that is no longer subject to future arising. The Tathagata is liberated from reckoning in terms of material form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, Vacha. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. The term reappears does not apply. The term does not reappear does not apply. The term both reappears and does not reappear does not apply. The term neither reappears nor does not reappear does not apply. Following this conversation, faith arose in the wanderer Vachagota, and he declared himself a lay follower. The Ratana Sutta describes arhats as follows: with previous birth exhausted and no new birth arising, the mind disengaged from future birth, the seeds of existence destroyed, with no impulse to grow again. Those wise ones are extinguished even as this lamp. SN 41-42. At the final passing away Nibbāna of Venerable Dabba Malaputta, the Buddha uttered this verse: broken is the body, all perception has ceased, feelings are stilled, volitional formations calmed, and consciousness has reached its end. UD 93. The Buddha recounted the events of this passing away to the monks and uttered this verse: just as the destination of a blazing spark of fire struck from the anvil, gradually fading, cannot be known, so in this case of those who have rightly won release and crossed the flood of binding lusts and reached unshakable bliss, their destination cannot be defined. UD 93. 6.10, Appendix 1. Sa Upadisana, Disa, and Anupadisa. Some scholars interpret the passages in the Anguttara Nikaya, which classifies enlightened beings into two kinds, i.e., Sa Upadisisa Pugala, Seka stream enterers, once returners and non-returners, who are still subject to grasping and defilement, and Anupadisisa Pugala, Asika, arhats, who are freed from grasping and defilement. By translating upadi as upadana, grasping, and thus define the two kinds of nibbana this way. Number 1, sa upadisisa nibbāna dhatu, nibbana with grasping remaining, or nibbana of those with latent defilement, i.e. nibbana of stream enterers, once returners and non-returners. And number 2, anupadisisa nibbāna dhatu, nibbana with no grasping remaining, or nibbana of those freed from grasping, i.e. nibbana of arhats. Translating this way springs from a confusion between states bhava, i.e. sa upadisisa nibbana, and anupadisisa nibbana, as and persons pugala, i.e. sa upadisisa pugala and anupadisisa pugala. The two kinds of nibbana describe the relationship between nibbana and awakened beings. The two persons describe the attributes of those in contact with nibbana. To avoid confusion, these two pairs should be clearly distinguished. The distinguishing word in this case is upadi, which has a different meaning when referring to either nibbana or to enlightened beings. Note, however, that some commentarial passages reinforce this misunderstanding, that sa upadisisa nibbana is the nibbana of sa upadisisa pugala. A clear development of the meanings of the two terms, sa-upa-di-sisa Nibbāna and anu-pa-di-sisa Nibbāna, stressing an activity or event, is the establishment of the terms kilesa parinibbāna and khandha parinibbāna. The former corresponds to sa-upa-di-sisa Nibbāna, while the latter corresponds to anu-pa-di-sisa Nibbāna. Despite the frequent use of these terms in this way, the commentators and sub-commentators were well aware of the meaning of sa-upa-di-sisa Nibbāna as denoting the quality of a state, as can be seen by these examples. The Buddha abided in the Nibbāna element with remainder, conducting his life for the benefit of all beings, faring well in this world until he attained the Nibbāna element without remainder. VISMT, and then Dutayo Bago, and then there's a comma with a really long poly word and an even longer poly word, kind of compounded, very, very long word. And then with the fruit of arhatship, the arhats are completely dispassionate, abiding in the Nibbāna element with remainder, wise, diligent, all day and night. With the end of their final mind, they attain the Nibbāna element without remainder with their final passing. ITAII 119. 6.11, Appendix 2. Buddhadhamma and Samparayika. As noun forms, Buddhadhamma and Samparayika exist as Buddhadhamma and Samparaya, respectively. These four words are used extensively both in the Pali Canon and in the commentaries, and generally have the meaning of present or this life on the one hand, and future, next life, or next world on the other. The compounds with atta, Buddhadhamma, present welfare, and Samparayika, future welfare, are especially familiar to scholars. Later in the commentaries, one occasionally finds Paramatha, supreme welfare, included to form a triad. In the original scriptures, however, one only finds the pair of Buddhadhamma and Samparayika. In this context, Samparayika refers to the welfare that surpasses or transcends that of Buddhadhamma and includes the definition of Paramatha. Paramatha was originally used on its own as a synonym for Nibbāna. In later contexts, the definition of Samparayika was narrowed to mean future welfare of the next world or heavenly, which was a welfare below the supreme, that is, not yet of Nibbāna. An example of Samparayika being used in its original context is the story of the old Brahmin, Brahmayu, who visited the Buddha. Then the Brahmin, Brahmayu, thought, "Permission has been granted me by the recluse Gotama. Which should I ask him about? Good in this life or the supreme good?" Then he thought, "I am skilled in the good of this life, and others too ask me about good in this life. Why shouldn't I ask him only about the supreme good?" Then he addressed the Blessed One in stanzas. How does one become a Brahmin? And how does one attain to knowledge? How has one the triple knowledge? And how does one become a holy scholar? How does one become an arhat? How does one attain completeness? How is one a silent sage? And how can one be called a Buddha? MII 144. In its original sense, Samparayika too encompasses the meaning of Paramatha, as seen in the Kanakathala Sutta, where King Vasanadi asked the Buddha about the distinction between members of the four castes. The Buddha replied that concerning the present life, nobles and Brahmins are held to be superior since people pay homage to them, but concerning a person's spiritual attainments, castes plays no role. Here, only the quality of a person's effort is important. As for deliverance, the Buddha claimed that there is no difference between that achieved by members of various social classes. Similarly, in the Mahanidesa, one sees two benefits, mundane and transcendent, from personal beliefs. What is the mundane benefit stemming from belief? Here, whatever is the doctrine of the teacher, the disciples share this doctrine. They honor, respect, worship, and hold in awe the teacher of this doctrine. And as a consequence, they receive robes, alms food, lodging, and medicine. And what is the transcendent benefit stemming from belief? Those disciples wish for the future. May this doctrine lead to birth as a Naga, Garuda, as Indra, Brahma, or as a god. This doctrine is sufficient for purity and deliverance. This view leads to purity and deliverance. ND 173.4. The commentators tend to restrict the definitions. Buddhadhamma, referring to this existence and life, and Samparayika, referring to the next life or world. Some commentaries on the two elements of Nibbāna use these same restricted definitions, i.e. Buddhadhamma, meaning in this life, and Samparayika, meaning in the future or after death. 6.12, Appendix 3, Final Mind. Karma Chitta, Karamaka Chitta, Karma Vijnana, and Karamaka Vijnana all mean the same thing, that is, last mind, final consciousness, or more explicitly, last mind in existence. It refers to the passing away, kuti, of an arhat's mind. Also called Parinibbāna Chitta, it is the mind of an arhat at death, or the mind at the moment of final passing. The term Karma Vijnana is first used in the Kula Nidisa, a secondary text of the Tipitaka. For example, at the final passing of an arhat, attaining the Nibbāna element without remainder due to the cessation of final consciousness. Right here, wisdom and mindfulness, materiality and mentality also cease. They are stilled, made tranquil, and no longer established. In D2.8, explaining S in 198-9, and referred to also at DHSA 236. In the commentaries, the term Karma Vijnana and Karma Chitta are frequently used. They sometimes associate Karma Chitta with attainment of the Nibbāna element without remainder. Equally, they associate the attainment of or initial abiding in Sa-upa-di-sisa Nibbāna with the fruit of arhatship. Note that in many Thai editions, Karma Chitta and Karma Vijnana are printed as Purima Chitta and Purima Vijnana, preceding mind/consciousness. Examples of such inconsistency include canonical texts that use Purima and the explanatory commentarial text that uses Karma, or a passage in one volume using one term and the identical passage in another volume using the other. The evidence, however, confirms that the correct term is Karima, Karima. 6.3, Appendix 4, Attaining Nibbāna. I've occasionally used the expression attaining Nibbāna because it is familiar and easy to understand, although the term that is more accurate or specific to this context is Sakhikiriya. Its verb form is Sakchikaroti. Later texts sometimes use Sakhikarana, which literally means realization. The commentaries explain it as to experience or see clearly for oneself. Although attaining Nibbāna may be more convenient, using realizing Nibbāna probably has less risk of misunderstanding. Attainment is closer to the Pali words ahigamma, verb ahigachati, and pati, past participle used with Nibbāna, pata. Both of these words are frequently used with Nibbāna, but in secondary context and usually in verses. The following words used with Nibbāna are scattered throughout the scriptures and are mainly used in verse. Aradheti, attain or accomplish. Pusati, reach, touch. Gachati, arrive at. And Labhati, obtain. 6.14, Appendix 5. Anupada Parinibbāna. MAII 155 states that Anupada Parinibbāna equals Apachaya Parinibbāna, complete unconditioned Nibbāna. And the Majjhima Nikaya Tika states that Apachaya Parinibbāna equals Anupadisisa Parinibbāna. It follows, therefore, that Anupadisisa Parinibbāna is identical to both Anupada Parinibbāna and Apachaya Parinibbāna, i.e., identical to the essential nature of Nibbāna as discussed earlier in this chapter, DHAI 286, ITAI 170, and BVA 227. Substitute the terms Anupada Parinibbāna for Anupadisisa Parinibbāna. Anupada Parinibbāna is an important term denoting Nibbāna. It always stands on its own and is often used to express the goal of Buddhism. Bhikkhu, the Dhamma is taught by me for the sake of final Nibbāna without fuel, and it is for the sake of final Nibbāna without fuel that the holy life is lived under the Blessed One. The commentaries generally define Anupada Parinibbāna as Apachaya Parinibbāna, the unconditioned, i.e., not conditioned by any fuel, which can be realized in this very life. Some teachers claim that Anupada Parinibbāna translates as final Nibbāna without clinging upadana, referring to the fruit of arhatship, but the commentaries reject this opinion. Furthermore, the Visuddhimagga, composed by Upatissa before Buddhaghosa composed the Visuddhimagga, explains Nisarana Vimutti as Anupadisisa Parinibbāna. Interestingly, this opinion conforms to the meaning expressed above. See the following discussion on deliverance. That ends chapter 6.